public land. So we've got a lot of public land around here. Everybody wants to get way in the back because that's where, and everybody goes way to the back. And the deer know that. And a lot of the very best hunting is in some of the most obvious places, closest to the parking lot. But people don't, they think, oh, boy, I better get away from the masses. Well, that's where the masses go. Why do some of the very biggest deer get killed by novice hunters? One, they don't get as excited as we do. And two, they don't do what we do. They do uncharacteristic things, which are what big bucks do. You can't get to be old by being lucky.
Mike Rex, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you.
I didn't really know who you were until we came up here. We came up here to turkey hunt with Eddie Salter, and he's like, man, y'all got to talk to my buddy Mike, man. He killed more big deer than anybody you know. And he's like, y'all got to go see his man cave. And I got to say, it did not disappoint, man. Like, how many deer are hanging up in here?
There are 60 mounts in this room.
There's 60? 60?
6D, yes.
60.
60. Okay. Wow. Jacob, what do you think?
This is a bunch of big deer we're going to talk about.
Yes.
Also, one thing might kind of start us off with, just talking about the man cave, we're going to cut in some footage of it. When it comes to the scoring system, what's so special about these deer as in from like a book standpoint?
So every one of these deer make the Buckeye Big Buck Club, which is the Ohio State record book. And our minimums by the Boone and Crockett standard are 140 typical, 160 non-typical. So that's how we sort of segregated this room, is these are all Buckeye Big Buck qualifiers. These were all killed by myself and my 3 sons.
All in a pretty tight area. We don't have to name the county.
Almost every deer in this room has come from within 10 miles of right here, and almost all of them were killed with archery equipment. There's a handful of them with a gun, a few of them with a crossbow, but most of them with vertical bow.
Awesome. And there's a lot of interesting things we're going to talk about, because we're going to talk about deer hunting, but also, I can't remember what you called it, but we call it our Conservation Advisory Board for Alabama, but you're a chairman up here for...
Yeah, I'm chairman of the Ohio Wildlife Council, which is like our oversight committee governing body over our Division of Wildlife. So we're appointed by the governors, 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats, and we approve or disapprove rule proposals made by our Division of Wildlife. So anytime the division wants to change a bag limit, a season date, anything like that, the Wildlife Council, we meet and we approve them or disapprove them. We almost always approve them.
Okay, so y'all are like a check on...
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's cool. So y'all don't set your seasons, bag limits, or anything. They do, but you approve it.
Correct. So the division makes a proposal. Let's say, for example, the deer bag's going to be X, and then they propose it to us, and we say yes or no. And we try to base things based on, the science and what they tell us, and then also the public input that we get, and try to balance the two out, and usually try to err towards the science end of it.
Oh, well, I was going to ask, how much does public input dictate certain things getting passed?
It does. I mean, I can give you an example of some times where public input has changed thought process. So our turkey flock, like a lot of states, especially Midwestern states and in the South and Southeast, our turkey flock isn't what it once was. And so we went from a two turkey bag to a 1 turkey bag, and we were looking at things that we could do to try to, improve turkey hunting and turkey populations. And one of them was we have a fall season here. And most of the fall turkeys that I knew about, me personally and my friends that I knew that people were shooting, I called them incidental shootings. They were deer hunters that happened to be in the woods in the fall, and they had a turkey tag in their pocket, and a flock of turkeys comes by and they shot them. And I didn't personally know very many people that actually went out in the fall and just targeted. They were out trying to shoot a turkey. And so the Division of Wildlife proposed cutting our fall turkey season. It used to be, I think, 7 weeks long. They proposed knocking it down to like 4 or 5 weeks. And I thought, well, this will be no big deal. Not many people are going to care about that. Well, when they made that proposal, we had people show up in mass. And there were a lot of folks out there that, this was like the 7th sign of the apocalypse. You know what I mean? They thought the world was over. And so anyway, we wound up making an amendment to it. Fall turkey hunting in Ohio really isn't consequential to the overall population flock. We might kill 600-700 birds here in the fall, which really is a drop in the bucket. But when your population is hurting and you shoot hens in the fall, the last thing you want to do is shoot females of any population if you're trying to build them back up. And so we have since taken some steps to reduce fall turkey hunting. However, there were a lot more people interested in it than I ever imagined.
Interesting. Now, I want to get into bow hunting whitetails.
Okay.
And we'll come back to some other just policy things or things that's kind of happened in Ohio over the last 10, 15 years that you've been, or your tenure with the agency and the commission.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, when did you get introduced to bow hunting?
Okay, so I've lived almost my entire life in Ohio, but for about 18 months, I lived in southeast Arkansas. Long story, but my dad got transferred down there when I was in ninth grade. And I moved into a little town, Warren, Arkansas, the southeast corner of the state. And there wasn't a lot to do there. There was no movie theater, there was no bowling alley, there was nothing really going on there. And I got in with some guys that were friends of mine, and my dad had some guys that worked with him that were real avid hunters. And they invited me to go deer hunting. I was 14 years old, 1978. And my first morning in a deer stand, I killed a deer. And it was the most incredible adrenaline rush I had ever, and maybe to this date, I've ever experienced. And I've been trying for the last 48 years to replicate that adrenaline rush that hits, as you fellas know, that people that don't hunt, you can't explain it to them. I mean, there's just nothing like it. And so I really got hooked on it there. I'm really the only person in my family that hunts. My father and my brother are fishermen, but they don't hunt. But I got hooked on it that morning, and it's been an obsession ever since. My wife will back that up.
And with that, was that how you got introduced into just deer hunting, or was that bow hunting as well?
Well, no, I was a gun hunt, actually. And then I got into archery hunting that same year. You could kill multiple bucks in Arkansas back in that time. And I bought a Bear Kodiak recurve 45-pound bow. And I got a deer with that bow also that year. And then we moved back to Ohio the next year, and I killed my first buck in Ohio in November of 1980 with a bow on public property just north of Columbus. And I've just been pretty much ate up with it ever since.
Wow, what a journey.
Yeah.
Especially coming from a family that there was no hunters really.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my family weren't anti-hunters, just nobody hunted. Just I shouldn't say that. I had a great uncle that was a real avid hunter, but other than that, most of my immediate family, I'm the only one that really likes to hunt.
Okay. And then transitioning, one thing that's interesting, because as long as you've been bow hunting, is how did the onset of new technology in the bow space, especially like through the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, how did that kind of change? Because you started out with a Bear recurve, Kodiak recurve, and slowly, changed with the times. Yeah. What was it like when you got your first compound?
Well, so my first compound was a Bear whitetail 100. I had that in 1980. I was sitting on a tree branch in Alum Creek State Park, just north of Columbus. And this 9-point buck walked underneath. I literally climbed up the branches, was sitting on a tree branch, and I had this compound bow with no sights. So I shot it instinctively. I was a shaft shooter where I looked down the shaft, and I shot that deer. And then the next year, I think I bought a Browning Explorer. And then every year after that, I started getting better and better. And then I kind of came full circle, and I went back and I hunted with a recurve for a while, and then I hunted with a crossbow, and then I went back to a compound bow, and I've been all over the map. I've only killed a handful of deer with a gun. Not that I have anything against gun hunting. Our archery season's over 4 months long up here. Our gun seasons are fairly short, so there's just a lot more opportunity with a bow.
Oh man. Yeah, Jacob and I were talking about that last year. These last 2 seasons we've went to Kansas and Iowa and bow hunted during the rut, and just the amount of bucks that we saw, the amount of really nice bucks that we saw, and just the opportunity that you have there is just different. Like, we don't really have that in the Southeast, and we know why. It's because we can shoot multiple deer and we have long gun seasons, which I like in the South. It's nice being able to go to other places that don't have that. We were talking about bow hunting and to have an opportunity at like really, really big deer consistently, like you kind of have to bow hunt. Like if you want to travel and go somewhere, that's where the majority of your opportunity is at.
Sure.
And we were talking to you about that earlier, about the difference between Ohio and Indiana in like Boone and Crockett entries. Can you explain that again?
Yeah, so Indiana historically was a 2-buck state. Ohio's always been a 1-buck state. Indiana was a 2-buck state. And if you look at Indiana from a geography standpoint, very similar to Ohio. Southern Indiana is hilly like this. Northern Indiana is flats where the glacier melted, formed the Great Lakes. And historically, Ohio was head and shoulders better than Indiana for quality, for big bucks, Boone and Crockett qualifying bucks. And Indiana went to a 1-buck limit 10, 15 years ago. And since that time, their number of Boone and Crockett entries has skyrocketed. Because when you can kill 2 bucks, a lot of times people will, oh, I'll shoot the first one that comes by and then I'll hold out for a trophy or whatever. Those bucks, a lot of those bucks are now surviving, getting older, and just makes the overall quality of hunting better. The only thing that Indiana does that could even, in my opinion, make their hunting even better is they hunt with guns during the rut. Their gun season comes in the middle of November, where Ohio, we always wait till the Monday after Thanksgiving and our rut is starting to peter off, so we don't bother them too much with guns. Although today with crossbow technology, that's maybe changing a little bit as far as the ability to kill bucks at longer distances during the rut. But Indiana is pretty much neck and neck with Ohio now, and a lot of it's because they went to be a 1-buck state.
Yeah.
How has crossbows, this is, you just said it, but how has crossbows affected harvest success and everything during archery season up here in Ohio?
Tremendous. So I'll give you some statistics here. I'm the secretary treasurer of the Buckeye Big Buck Club, which is a state record book. So all the entries come to me. So we give out top 3 by weapons category special awards at our yearly banquet. And 30 years ago, by far the majority of our big bucks were being killed with firearm, either muzzleloader, mostly with shotguns. Now we can hunt with straight wall rifle cartridges up here. So we give out top 3 by weapons, meaning crossbow, vertical bow, muzzleloader, shotgun, and then the rifle, straight wall rifle category. Out of 100 non-typical entries, which are 160 or better, last year could not come up with 3 that were killed with a shotgun. Out of 100, over 70 were shot with a crossbow. Big difference. Or excuse me, that statistic is wrong. Shot with archery equipment, but the majority of those were killed with a crossbow. 70 out of 100.
And that's where I was going to get at. And I should have asked you this before because maybe we could have looked it up. Do you know of the ballpark number of the total deer that are harvested with archery equipment? How many of that percentage is crossbow versus vertical bows?
I have not looked at that recently, but it not too long ago was about 50-50. It's probably now, I'm sure it's heavier on the crossbow side. Because what's happened is a lot of our gun hunters who never archery hunted before have converted to archery hunting because the crossbow technology is so good. It's like almost like shooting a single shot gun. I mean, it can't shoot an arrow through brush and all. It's still the crossbow bolt, but the technology is such that these crossbows are accurate out to farther distance. And our gun seasons only a week long. Our muzzleloader's 5 days. We have a bonus gun season where our archery season's 4 months. So you got better weather, you get to hunt during the rut. And so a lot of people that historically hunted with a gun have converted to archery because of the improvements in crossbow technology.
Do you have any thoughts on how that could affect the overall deer herd of Ohio in the next 10, 15 years?
So, yeah, there's a lot going on. You talk about from a quality perspective.
Exactly.
So there's a lot going on there. Our entries in our state record book have historically mirrored the total kill 2 years removed. And here's what happens. So, for example, the deer that went in the club this year at our 2026 banquet, most of them were killed in 2024, meaning they were killed in 24. That's a 60-day drying period by the Boone and Crockett standard. They're scored in 25, and then they go into book in 26. So we're always 2 years in the rear. And historically, the entries mirror the kill 2 years removed. So when the statewide kill's up here, the entries are up here. And when statewide kill goes down, 2 years later, our number of entries go down. Well, what's changing a little bit now is that 20, 30, 40 years ago, there wasn't near the emphasis on trophy hunting as there is today. And the average deer hunter went deer hunting. And he wanted a big buck, but he also wanted a button buck. Now there's a lot more emphasis on trophy hunting. And so a lot of smaller bucks are getting a pass, especially because social media shaming, oh, what'd you kill that 4.4, that kind of stuff. So it used to be a big deal to kill a buck. Now it's a much bigger deal to kill a big buck. Everybody wants, not everybody, but lots of people want a trophy buck. And so because of that, more deer are making it to 3, 4, 5 years old. Fewer of those younger deer are getting shot as a percent of the population of deer that are being shot. Also, our land is getting tied up. More and more rural property, hunting property is getting leased up or bought up for recreational purposes. So the days used to be 30, 40, 50 years ago, you could just knock on doors in this area. And when I first moved here in 1982 to this part of the state, probably 50% of the landowners that I talked to, yeah, come on, you can hunt now. If it's, 2% would be a lot. Almost everything, you either own it, your family or you lease it, and if any landowner that will let anybody hunt today, you may as well go hunt public because his property is getting hunted really hard. So what's changed was 30, 40, 50 years ago, a lot of our deer were killed by deer drives. People, the Orange Army would line up and they'd push deer from this woodlot over to that woodlot to a waiting, firing squad. Well, those guys now have a harder time doing that. We see very little of that. Not some people still deer drive, but not near as much as they used to. However, a lot of our ground has been tied up where properties that used to have lots of hunters now have few hunters. And so more deer are slipping through the cracks. So it's sort of evening out. Excuse me. So years ago, we had more emphasis on deer hunting, less emphasis on trophy hunting, which helped to grow mature deer. Today, we have more emphasis on trophy hunting, but we have more difficult access. So we have more deer making it to maturity because you have fewer hunters on larger pieces of ground, more deer are making it to maturity. So that's kind of even things out.
Interesting. Okay. Also, so I just wanted to bring up the crossbow situation because I've seen some other buddies of mine or residents up here that complain about just how many individuals are hunting with crossbows.
Yeah.
It's very, very common.
Yep.
And they're worried about not only people taking just getting everybody's business, but taking long shots and just killing some really big deer.
Yeah.
And is there do you see any negativity specifically from a management strategy with the use of crossbows?
Well, I don't know if this is just crossbows, but one of the issues that we have from a management perspective, and a lot of states have this problem, is we call it the devaluation of does. So again, people used to just go deer hunting. Now everybody wants a big buck. Not everybody, but lots of people want a big buck. And so we've devalued does. And I'm not saying that crossbows are the culprit there, but they probably have contributed because, again, you have more people targeting big bucks. You have more gun hunters that have converted to archery. And as far as the taking long shots and that kind of stuff, to be honest with you, I think I would rather have a person that's not going to practice with the vertical bow. I'd rather have a crossbow in his hands than I would a vertical bow in his hands because he's probably going to wound more deer. But the crossbow does give you more range, yet you're still shooting an arrow. So the fastest crossbows are shooting at like 400 plus feet a second. The speed of sound is still almost 1,200 feet a second. So that sound still gets there 3 times faster. And I know you guys have videoed stuff, right? You see how deer react. And especially when you're out taking 40, 50-yard shots with archery equipment, a lot of bad things can happen. A lot of bad things can happen. So me personally, I won't shoot crossbow, bow, any kind of archery equipment out past 30 yards. Just too many bad things can happen. I don't care if it's wide open field. And I've had people tell me before, well, Rex, you gotta learn to read the mood of a deer. I can't read the mood of my wife. How am I gonna learn to read the mood of a deer? You know what I'm saying? I mean, they're all nervous, right?
Yeah. That's hilarious. So, okay. Well, I want to get back into, that was just a little segue, but you brought up crossbows. I just wanted to ask you that.
Yeah.
I want to get more into, and hopefully you can kind of work some stories in. When you came up as a bow hunter, like really in the 70s, but really getting into the 80s and 90s, before I'm going to say kind of mastering your craft to be successful every single year killing big deer. What was your, not really transition, but what was the storyline of you growing as a bow hunter to put yourself in more and more positions to get opportunity? Because that's a challenge I think a lot of people have starting out.
I totally agree. So here was my personal progression. So I have a friend of mine who he's painfully honest. He just says what he thinks, and it doesn't matter if he hurts your feelings or not. So through the 80s, when I first started hunting, I just wanted a deer. And by chance, the first several deer I had opportunity to kill were bucks, but I would have shot a doe if I had the opportunity. I just happened to kill bucks. So then through the 80s, I killed, what's the 1 buck a year state? I killed a buck every year through the 80s, but most of them are younger bucks, smaller bucks. And I had a friend of mine walk in my house back about 1988, 89. He looked at my trophy wall and he said, you've killed a lot of deer, but you haven't really killed any big deer. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. Thanks. So then I said, well, I really want a Pope and Young, which is the archery world record buck, which is 125 typical, 150 non-typical. So I killed one of those. And it was that first year I killed a Pope and Young that I really got serious about trying to take a better buck. Then I said, okay, I want a Buckeye big buck. And I got one of those. And so then I said, then I want a Boone and Crockett. Then I got one of those. And so through the 90s, my goal was buckeye big buck. I really wanted to kill one that netted over 140 typical or 160 non-typical. That's kind of how we drew the line. And then in 2005, I killed a buck of a lifetime. And that's a blessing and a curse. So after that, I killed a 200-inch non-typical with a 200-inch typical frame. And so I had killed a bunch of 160s after that, and it really wasn't as exciting as it would have been had I not killed a 200. Fortunately for me, I have 3 sons, and right about the time that happened, they started getting interested in hunting. So I funneled a lot of my enthusiasm for the sport into my boys. And I used to tell people, here's how you know you really love somebody. When you've got one really hot stand and you're sitting in a truck waiting to pick up the guy that's hunting in it. You know what I'm saying? That's how you know you care about somebody, right? When you put them in your very best spot. And so what I did was I funneled a lot of my enthusiasm into the sport, into my kids. And fortunately for me, my kids are every bit as ate up with it as I am. So every time they would get close to a big deer, and as I watched their growth as a hunter, I got a lot of satisfaction out of that. And so I was very lucky, and I've sort of come full circle now. And I'm really at the stage of my hunting career now where the experience is the most important to me. It's not so much how big are the antlers as much as what did I have to do to get them. That's really where a trophy has kind of landed with me is it public land? What weapon did I use? How much effort did I mean? So I tell people this, my boys and I, we have not taken a buck since 2004, 22 years that we didn't know about, meaning either have a trail camera photo of, we saw it somewhere, we had some reconnaissance on it. Not to say that if a giant mystery buck walked by, we wouldn't have shot it, but just every deer we've killed, we knew something about it. And so there's a lot more to me. There's a lot more satisfaction into pursuing a specific animal, getting within archery range of them, and then taking them versus just lucking into one. Just happen to be sitting out there in this big. Don't get me wrong; they're both exciting, but to me, there's a greater level of satisfaction of kind of putting the puzzle together and then making the plan work than versus just killing a big deer. I used to tell my sons a lot that, these mounts in our house, all these are styrofoam and marbles, right? It's a memory. It's a memory of the hunt. That's why you mount it. What did I have to do to get it that makes it a trophy, more so than how big are his antlers?
If you want to get a head start on deer season, you can go out and you can actually scout feed trees in summer. This is something we've been talking about on the podcast quite a bit lately. Today I'm out here, I've got a pair of Vortex Viper HDs. This is a great pair of binoculars for this. And what we're doing is we're just looking up into these oak trees, looking to see if we can see the little acorn buds on the limbs. So as summer goes on, it's going to get easier and easier to see those buds as they get larger. A tip for that is when you're looking up in the tree, you want to find a limb that's daylighted. It's just nothing but daylight behind it. You're looking at an isolated limb, and you're just going to want to pick that thing apart with a good pair of binos like these that are clear. I like to use a trekking pole and actually brace the binos on the trekking pole and sit down underneath that tree and really look at it for a while. So if you want to get a head start scouting feed trees this summer, go get you a pair of Vortex binoculars. Head on over to eurooptic.com. Use the code SOUTHERN10 and it's going to get you a discount on these binoculars or any other optics that Vortex sells. One thing we talk about with almost every guest on this show is map scouting. My favorite map scouting tool is LiDAR. If you're unfamiliar, LiDAR is basically like a 3D scan of the Earth's surface. I like to say it kind of takes away all the surprises. LiDAR is now available on onX Hunt on their topography map. If you go to your app right now, click on the topography map, you can flip on that LiDAR feature and boom, it's going to come on and you're going to see what I'm talking about. The LiDAR is going to allow you to see things that are normally hidden from view. This might be ditches, bends and creeks, rocks, old road beds. I personally love old road beds because deer like to walk them. They're great places to find scrapes. They're great camera locations. And before, an old road bed or an old logging road might be something that you kind of happen upon while you're out scouting or hunting. Well, now with the LiDAR, before I go into an area, I can turn on that LiDAR and I can see exactly where those road beds are. Even old logging roads from the 1930s, you can still see them on there. So that allows me to go straight to those spots and check them out. It's just an incredibly helpful tool, and it's available now on onX Hunt. And hey, if you want to get 20% off your onX Elite membership, you can use the promo code SOUTHERN. Like I said, it's going to save you 20%. Go check out that LiDAR feature. You'll be glad you did. Know where you stand with OnX Hunt.
There's more of you guys getting into saddle hunting than ever before, and a common question we always get is how do you get comfortable in a saddle? Because there's so many moving parts. And today I'm gonna give you 3 of the best tips that I have for getting comfortable in the saddle after doing this for about 8.5 years. Number 1 is tether height. Setting your tether at the right height is gonna give you extreme comfort, but this is one big reason why you need to practice with it. I like mine right at nose level when I'm standing on the platform. The other is your bridge length. Having an adjustable bridge on your saddle makes it extremely comfortable to fine tune that comfort, and I like mine extended out almost all the way. The third is how you sit in your saddle. Some people like the saddle sitting just below the belt line, which I've done in some saddles in the past. That made it more comfortable. Some are right at the belt line, and some are a little bit above the belt line. Now, having a very comfortable saddle makes it really easy to do all this stuff with less adjustment. And the Lone Star saddle from Latitude Outdoors is that saddle for me personally. I really like this saddle, and I really like the hip pinch reduction system that's built into the saddle that gives me a lot more comfort all day long with less adjustments needed. If you want to check out the Lone Star saddle from Latitude Outdoors, you can go to latitudeoutdoors.com for more information. Over the years, we've interviewed quite a few successful ground hunters when it comes to bow hunting, and the commonalities between all of them is using the shadows to their advantage. Having overhead cover, back cover, and a little bit of front cover that adds a little bit more shadows to their setup, which allows them to hide a lot easier. That's what we've done today and built this brush blind for Andrew to come in here with his recurve and shoot some does, hopefully early season when these white oaks behind the camera are going to be dropping. One important thing about blending in the shadows is having something that works camel-wise in the shadows, and that's one thing I like about this Mossy Oak Woodsman Leaf Jacket is it's a little bit darker in color, and to me blends in a little bit better to the shadows during early season when you have full leaves on those trees. This is something I'm going to keep in my backpack all season because it's really compact, it's really lightweight, and breathes really well, and I really won't need it until I need it, but it's going to be in my backpack the whole time, which is really nice because of how compact it is. So if you're interested in ground hunting a little bit this year or having extra concealment up in the tree, check out the Mossy Oak Woodsman Leaf Jacket at mossyoak.com.
I'm going to grab this rack right here to show it to everyone real quick.
Yeah.
Oh, you want to hold it? Of course you do.
So, well,
Of course you do.
this is insanity, this deer. So this is a deer you found behind your house.
Yes.
And the reason I wanted to show this is because when I've always thought of Ohio, I'm thinking of like cornfield, like agriculture, flatland and everything. Where we're at right now is very wooded and very hilly. It's a lot like places that we have back home in Alabama. And I just bring that up to say that, you know, when you think of, I was telling Eddie this yesterday, when you think of a deer of this caliber, this is what, 180-inch deer? When you think of a deer of this caliber, I always think about them in an agricultural setting. Seeing something like this come through timber is just, I can't even imagine what that, never happened to me. I don't know. I can't imagine what that would be like. And it's really cool that y'all get to hunt deer of this caliber in this kind of setting. And you're talking about your progression as a hunter and how you were, you wanted to get a Pope and Young, then you wanted to get a Buckeye Big Buck, then a Boone and Crockett. In those early years, I mean, how were you figuring things out? Did you have some really good mentors? Were you reading articles or what was it?
You know, a lot of it was just trial and error. I have a PhD in the Wildlife Management School of Hard Knocks because I've made like every mistake you could possibly make. And, you know, I think some of the better hunters and fishermen and any endeavor like this are the people that, you know, learn from their mistakes, don't do the same thing twice. I was very fortunate. I've had some good places to hunt. Obviously, the best deer hunter in the world will not kill a giant buck in a place that doesn't have giant bucks, right? So that's everything. The same thing I used to tell people, the best bass fisherman in the world can't catch a 10-pound bass in a lake that doesn't have 10-pound bass. So we're very fortunate that this part of the Midwest, we do have some pretty good hunting. Also, this specific part of the Midwest, Southern Ohio, is really kind of unique in that it's a benign area from a weather standpoint. So you get up in northern Ohio, northeast Ohio, especially east of Lake Erie, they get really heavy snowfall. They get 100+ inches of snow a year up there. Their winters, that's stressful on the game. Down here, we get snow, but it doesn't get real hot for very long down here. It doesn't get real cold for very long down here. It doesn't get real wet for very long down here. You know, we have a real nice mix of seasons, and we also have, one of the nice things about having all this cover and all these woods is we have a lot of open agriculture areas where deer are exposed and can be seen by people. And so there's pockets where deer can get age on. That's probably in the Midwest. That's the number one of the three real variables that dictate how big a deer is going to get. One is obviously age, one is genetics, one is nutrition. All areas of Ohio have good genetics, some better than others. All areas of Ohio have some good nutrition, some better than others. But some areas of Ohio, it's really hard to get age on a deer. And so a lot of times in these big wooded settings like this, these deer can grow to 3, 4, 5, 6 years old easier than they can in an agricultural setting where everybody can see them.
That makes perfect sense. And just to tie it back for our southern audience, we've interviewed a friend of ours several times in Alabama, Alan Summerford, who hunts around Alabama. He's got small properties in Alabama. He's in good parts of Alabama, but these properties that he has control of, he puts a big emphasis on letting the deer get old. And of Alabama deer, he's got a wall full of Alabama deer that are comparable to a lot of these deer that you have. Mm-hmm. They just have the mass. They've got the gnarly bases, non-typical points. He's killed, I don't know how many drop tine deer he's killed in Alabama, but he always says that it's the age and specifically letting him get past where most people would think. So like he's not shooting them at 4.5 a lot of times. He's trying to let them get 5+, 5, 6, 7. He's like, once they get that mature, that's when you start seeing, that's when they really blow up. And we've talked to biologists who have said the same thing, where especially when it comes to non-typical characteristics, they might have that in them, but they don't express it until they're 6 years old, basically. Yeah. So you're saying you see the same thing?
Yeah, and to your point about when deer get older and non-typical, so in the state of Ohio, officially scored every year, we'll kill 20 plus 200-inch non-typicals. Some years we'll kill 40 plus non-typicals. That's what are officially scored. That's not, a lot of them aren't scored, so it's way more than that. But on a good year, we'll score maybe 3 or 4 that net over 180 typical. It's much easier to get a deer to 200 inches non-typical than it is 180 typical. Because when a deer gets to be 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, they start growing all that stuff. They grow kickers and stickers and drop tines, and they just get non-typical. Usually your very biggest typicals are only 4 or 5 years old. I believe the Hanson buck, which is a world record typical, was only 4 years old. And it was just clean. It just had, perfect genetics. So, and to the point about your friend, chances are if you turn him loose in a woodlot and me loose in a woodlot, he'll hunt circles around me. A guy that can kill deer like this consistently in the South has his stuff together. I mean, really, because we spoke about this earlier, because of the long gun seasons you guys have, and you don't have the genetics that we have. You got a different strain of deer, and you don't. It's just a totally different animal. Killing a 130, 140-inch deer consistently in the southeast is like killing a 160, 170 consistently up here, maybe even better. Mm-hmm. So just a completely different animal.
Yeah, it's crazy. And up here in these hills, how did you go about, like in the early days, again, when you first got started?
Yeah.
How'd you go about finding the deer? Because that was before trail cameras, right?
Yeah. So I think I was telling you earlier, my history of killing record book deer. I killed my first Pope and Young in 89. I killed my first Buckeye Big Buck in 91. Killed my second Buckeye Big Buck in 97. Killed my third Buckeye Big Buck in 99. And then from like 20 or 21 to 2016, I killed one every year. And by far the biggest game changer were trail cameras. Because in this wooded settings like this, there are woods in the eyes, or there are eyes in the woods all the time. Because I don't have a lot of agricultural fields to glass, I couldn't find those. I used to just go sit over scrapes and pinch points and just hope that a big deer came by. And my reconnaissance was I saw a big deer, somebody that I trust that knows what a big deer is, saw a big deer. And so with these trail cameras, it was, if you were to take something away from me that would really hinder my ability to get close to big deer, trail cameras are by far the number one variable. Yeah. That was the biggest change. And then wireless trail cameras, and that's real-time information.
Yeah. And another thing that you mentioned earlier, which I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, that was very, very interesting is when we first met you the other day, we were talking about coyotes and bobcats moving into this area over the years. Mm-hmm. And we first talked about how that changed the turkey hunting and everything. But you mentioned before we got started here how it's changed the deer hunting and how the deer were bedding specifically.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So how has the proliferation of those predators changed the deer behavior here?
Well, it's changed it a lot. Because like I said, when I first started hunting in the late 70s, early 80s, when we would jump deer, it was in thick stuff, rabbit cover. We called it grouse cover. This is back when we had grouse. We don't have hardly any grouse anymore, but really thick stuff that's knocking your hat off every other step. And today, our deer still browse in that stuff. I mean, you'll find them in that, but they do not lay down in it. And they do not lay down in it because that's where the coyotes and the bobcats spend most of their time. And they're now the apex predator. They're working on them 365 days a year. We used to just work on them during hunting season. So the deer it has changed where our deer bed, not necessarily where they feed, but it's changed where they bed. They tend to bed now more, especially the mature bucks, in more open cover, wooded ridges with little pockets or little patches of cover, maybe a treetop, a fallen tree, a snag, something where it gives them a little bit of breakup, but they can hear approaching danger, they can see approaching danger, they can smell approaching danger. Because coyotes and bobcats hunt with their nose, they can sneak up on them a lot easier in really thick stuff. And so now that doesn't apply to the whole state of Ohio either. What I'm telling you, that mostly applies to the unglaciated hills, which is about 2/3 of Ohio. And so in the farm country where they have CRP, a big, the deer almost always bed because that's the only cover surrounded by thousands of acres of agriculture. So that really applies to these wooded hillsides. Our deer used to bed in really thick stuff. Now, not so much anymore. It's really changed the way that we think about hunting.
We're going to jump around so much, but we're on this topic, so we're going to stay on this topic for a little bit. But remember, trail cameras, Andrew.
Okay.
You were mentioning one of your buddies earlier on, talking about the lack of socialization with mature bucks with other deer.
Yes.
And them kind of want to be by themselves. And then, which I'd love for you to kind of maybe rehash that for us on here. But
Sure.
The idea of you would always try to focus on that thick cover, figure out where the bedding is and focus on that thick cover. And that's where you set up and hunt.
Yeah.
And then you kind of figure it out a little bit later on that, the whole food source transitions and areas that put yourself in a lot better circumstance for targeting that mature buck versus seeing a bunch of does. Could you kind of hash that out for us a little bit from like what your friend told you, but also like what you were seeing and how you transitioned, how you were approaching hunting?
Well, so the real epiphany for me was historically, it was a lot easier to figure out where the deer are feeding than where they were bedding. And I used to for years. I was a student of trying to figure out where our deer bed. We get a lot of snows up here, and I would take off walking after a fresh snow and look for beds. And the only common denominator I could come up with in the wintertime up here after snows were south-facing slopes because it's warmer and the snow melts quicker, and that's where you'd find a lot of deer beds. But there was really no rhyme or reason to up on the ridge, down low, whatever. I had a hard time piecing it together. But getting back to the story I was telling you earlier about deer and deer being antisocial. So historically, my philosophy was, okay, so I assume they're bedding in that thick stuff over there, and I know they're feeding in this food plot or apple tree or whatever the heck it is over here. And so I would try to get in between the two. What has changed from that perspective is I no longer try to get in between the food source and the thickest cover. I try to get to the food source, and then I just go out the spokes from that, meaning the most logical path to get there. And I think I mentioned to you the real epiphany I had was when this fellow's name was David Morris. He owns Tecumate, used to own North American Whitetail magazine. He was telling me about how when a deer gets to be 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, they become, quote, antisocial, meaning that they don't like crowds of any kind. They don't like lots of chipmunks, squirrels, birds, whatever. They don't like lots of other deer. They're very solitary creatures. They only trust their eyes. They only trust their nose. They only trust their ears. And he brought this up to me about trail cameras. He asked me if I was getting pictures of any good bucks. I said, yeah, but it's almost always in the middle of the night. And he said, well, where are you putting your trail cameras? So I'm putting them over high traffic areas. I'm putting them over food sources and places where deer are coming. And he said, well, then why do you think they show up, in the middle of the night? And I'm like, well, that's because that's when big deer moves in the middle of the night. And he said, well, if it was just a cover of darkness, why aren't they the first deer there as soon as it gets dark? And I thought about it. I said, don't know. And he said, that's because that's when the masses are there. That's when lots of deer are there. And deer are antisocial. They don't like crowds. So they wait for the crowd to thin out, and then they come and feed. And I went, wow. When he said that, I said, that's exactly what I have witnessed all these years. But I just never really put two and two together. But I knew that it also fit with my previous strategy of going out the spokes, catching them coming to it. But the other problem with hunting right over a food source, a food plot, or anything that gathers deer is obviously mature bucks are rarely the first deer there. You get an old nanny doe around you, and she's probably going to get down where the wind's going to swirl. Something's going to happen. If she's around you long enough, she's going to pick you off. She's going to start snorting, and your hunt's over. And then you can't get out of the stand. Now it's dark. I've got 15 deer in front of me. I don't want to see me climb down. And so it was really eye-opening when he told me, basically when he clued me in the fact that these old deer, when they get to be 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, they really don't like crowds of any type.
All right, so we've heard from a lot of different guys, especially guys who target the bigger, older bucks specifically, about them being more solitary and they don't like to spend a lot of time around other deer. I mean, we've heard that in Alabama. We've heard it all across the Southeast, the Midwestern guys that we've interviewed. So it's a consistent theme. My question to you, as someone who's been successful targeting those bucks for so long now, is how does that change your approach when you're hunting those deer? Like, do you have to unlearn some things to then switch over into hunting that older age class?
Yeah, yes, I'd say that. Yeah, I've evolved, and my techniques have changed some over the years. Again, there's so much information out there, like podcasts and TV shows. And so when I first cut my teeth doing this, a lot of it was trial and error. And now there's so much information readily available. So I use this example about turkey hunting. So I'm a real avid turkey hunter. I hardly ever miss a day, and I turkey hunt in state all over the country and just about every place that has them. And I used to feel like, I got to know Eddie Salter and Matt Rhett 30 plus years ago. And I used to feel like I had intellectual capital. Like I knew stuff that the average guy didn't know. Not today. Everybody knows what I know. I mean, between all the information, the podcast and all the stuff that's out there are guys that just picked up a mouth yelper 3 years ago, call circles around me. They're just gifted like that. And there's so much information out there. The only difference between me and the average turkey hunter in this area is I'm out there every day. And one of the things that there's no shortcut for this, is a lot of the places where I turkey hunt, I know that when they roost over there, sometime this morning, they're going to wind up over there when they do that. That's learning. And it's interesting. I have a couple places that I've hunted since the mid 80s, that these turkeys always roost in the same place. So you fellas deer hunt a lot. You know that there are certain areas based on topography where deer will scrape every year and they'll rub, and you always find scrapes over on this flat, and has something to do with the wind currents and, whatever makes it just right for them. And the same thing with turkey roosts. There are some trees, the branches, they like pine boughs, pine trees come out, certain kinds of oak trees that have certain kinds of branches or elevation, whatever, and the turkeys like to roost over there. And so I'm fortunate in that I've hunted a lot of these areas for so many years that, boy, if I hear one gobbling on the roost over there in the evening, I know where we need to be in the morning based on the topography of the land. That's really the only intellectual capital that I have over the average guy, because there's so much information out there today. So to your point about the deer, I've learned a lot on social media over the years and debating these topics with people. And I've met a lot of people via social media that I would have never met otherwise, that have shared a lot of information with me that has altered the way that I hunt. And so, and it's because, I learned from their mistakes. And so occasionally, like that David Moore story I told you, someone will tell you something, and you're like, wow, I've seen that. I just never paid attention to it. But what a great idea. And I'm sure that's happened to you fellas.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like, so with the big bucks, are you having to find areas with less deer in them to find those big bucks?
No, I don't know that I've delve that deep into it. So I also tell people this. Usually the difference between a great place to hunt, from a trophy perspective, a great place to hunt and a not so great place to hunt is usually just one deer, right? So you're right. I mean, and here's the other part about really big mature bucks. They don't tolerate each other real well. They spread out. So when I told you I have a PhD in the Wildlife Management School of Hard Knocks, I've made every mistake you can make. So about 35 years ago, I was able to, between what I owned, I had bought on my own, and I had a good friend that owned a bunch of ground in behind me that he let me manage for him at about an 800-acre block of deer habitat behind my house that I had complete control over. And it was surrounded by public hunting on a couple sides and a landowner, an absentee landowner on the other side that let anybody hunt. So I had a lot of hunting pressure around me, but I had this square mile and a third that I had complete control over. And I thought to myself, boy, if I can just keep the masses out of there, I'm going to have a Boone and Crockett behind every bush. And that's when I learned you can have quantity or you can have quality. You cannot have both. So you have to take your pick. And so by keeping a lot of people out that had once hunted that ground, I made a lot of enemies out of people that used to hunt there. And because we weren't shooting enough does. So when when a male white-tailed deer gets to be a year and a half old, his mother displaces him to keep him from breeding his sisters and cousins and aunts and all that stuff. And so those year and a half and 2.5-year-old bucks were being displaced by these does that we weren't shooting. They weren't being replaced because the hunting pressure around me was so intense. So what happened was, over time, my habitat started to implode. Some clear cuts that were back there grew up into pole-sized timber, wasn't cutting any timber, wasn't doing any of the things that I needed to do from a habitat perspective, wasn't killing enough deer. And my hunting over time now it took me years to figure that out. I'm kind of a slow learner like that. And I had the same instance with a lake. I used to own a 28-acre lake that at one time produced the 3rd and 4th largest bass in the history of Ohio out of a 28-acre lake. And this place was a bass factory. It was real shallow. The deepest spot was only 8 feet, and it held back a bunch of floodwater. It was built by the Army Corps of Engineers back in the 60s to hold back floodwater. And it grew fish. The growth rates in the lake were really just astounding. And it got a lot of fishing pressure because it belonged to an absentee landowner. And I wound up buying it from this person. And I thought, man, if I can just keep the masses out of here and keep everybody keep on, I'm going to have a 5-pound bass underneath every log. And that's the second time I learned where you can have quantity or you can have quality. What happened? I wasn't taking enough fish out. Now, the interesting thing was, anybody that ever asked me for permission to fish, I gave it to them, but I wanted to be asked. And not many people asked me. And so, but I did let some people fish there, but we weren't taking enough fish out. And so after 4, 5, 6 years, the populations just exploded, and I had a bunch of stunted fish, and my growth rates just dropped off the table. And that, again, that's when I learned that, man, if you want big fish, you got to take fish out. You got to manage that, that aquaculture or whatever they call it. And the same thing with deer. If you want to have really good deer, you got to take does out for sure, and you got to keep that population manageable. And it makes all the difference in the world. And so I took a very simplistic approach, and it was the wrong approach.
Man, it's interesting to me how you keep drawing comparisons to other forms of hunting or fishing. Like, we're talking about deer, but we're also talking about turkeys and bass and everything.
Yeah.
But that's interesting to me because to me, that's kind of the quality. That's like a trait of being a woodsman, is that when you're out there and you do multiple things, you can draw comparisons from from other chases that help you out in your deer hunting.
For sure.
And you know who he reminds me of just with that statement, as you already talked about, is Alan Summerford back in Alabama.
Yeah.
Alan has the same approach. The gentleman he was talking about has much different land across the state, kills some exceptional Alabama deer. He is a believer you have to hammer the does because your neighbors typically aren't, because every state is just more and more focused on just killing bucks.
Yeah, it's across the board.
Exactly. So there's less and less does that typically get killed, and a lot of neighbors just don't really want to kill many does, and that's what he focuses on. And he's like, that's an integral part of his management strategy, and it works extremely, extremely well. But it's a lot of work. Because shooting does isn't the shooting does. You ain't letting them lay. You got to do something with the meat. Whether you donate it somewhere, you're taking it, you're giving it to somebody. Yeah. And if you're trying to harvest a bunch of does, it's a lot of work.
Yeah. We here in Ohio, so we have bonus doe tags or antlerless tags. And we were cutting it off, I believe, at gun season, which is right after Thanksgiving. Then we have a bonus gun season in the middle of December. We moved it to there. And I've had people complain to me about, hey, Rex, why don't we take that bonus season and make it the whole year? Well, the problem is, on a 4-month season, if you can take those bonus doe, well, I'll wait till the weather's right. I'll wait till it cools off, you know what I mean? And all of a sudden, wow, that bowl game's next week, and I don't want to, well, it's too cold out or whatever. If you make it in a finite window of time, it creates a sense of urgency for people, and it gets them to actually do something. Well, wait a minute, my permit's going to expire in another week. I better kill that doe. Versus if I got all season to do it, by the end of the season, you'll come up with enough reasons to not do it. And so that's one of the ways that we encourage people to shoot more does. But it's a real problem, and I don't have a good answer for it. But for the future of the sport and for the future of our heritage, we need to come up with a way to, I don't want to say value does more, but we need to really emphasize some avenues and ways to get people to shoot more does.
Me and Jacob are fighting over questions now. Well, so on that same subject, quality versus quantity. Yeah. One, we've heard from several guys who are consultants, land managers, that in some of these big buck hotspots that are just famous for big bucks, like you think about Iowa, for instance.
Yep.
We've been told, I don't hunt there, so I don't know if this is true or not.
We're on the same wavelength. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay. So some of these areas, since they've become so popular for big deer, are starting to go downhill for that reason, because big money guys they're coming in, they're leasing up a lot of land, they're buying a lot of land.
Yeah.
They come and hunt for 10 days in November, and all they care about is shooting a big buck. They're not shooting the does.
Yep.
They do food plots and everything. They might manage it, but they're not doing the boots on the ground, like killing enough does or anything like that.
Yeah.
And so it's sending those areas downhill, like on a slow decline.
Yeah.
So you're basically, that's what you've seen as well.
100%. Yeah.
What I was going to say is those guys were talking about they had landowners that they were consultants with that were selling farms in Iowa,
Yes.
going to parts of Indiana that had a lower deer population, but a good buck to doe ratio
Yeah.
to build up a property, and the money could stretch further in parts over there where they could buy a bigger tract, do more management, but have a quicker turnaround on producing bigger deer than what they could in Iowa, which is crazy to think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, to me, and this also ties into the fact that you guys had the worst EHD outbreak ever.
Well, I don't know. There's no way to prove this, but right here where we're sitting in Southeast Ohio, we're in Athens County, Ohio. We had, for sure, one of the worst known EHD outbreaks in the history of North America. There have been some other bad ones, but what was unique about this one was we've been dealing with EHD in this area for about 30 plus years in pockets. We'll have it in, this drainage, that ridge, this township, but, the areas around it, for whatever reason, it's a very spotty, kind of disease. This year, it blanketed hundreds of square miles. It blanketed almost the entire county, Washington County, which is just east of here. It blanketed about 2/3 of Meigs County, which is just south of here, and about 2/3 of Athens County, where we're sitting, to the tune of, they use a statistic, they say about 10% of the deer that die from EHD get reported to the DNR. So it has a lot to do with the time of year they die. They die in August, September. Nobody's in the woods, hot mosquitoes, and they die around water sources and creeks or whatever. Just not a lot of activity. People out there to find them. So they estimate that about 10% of the deer that die get reported. So in these 3 counties, there were about 5,500 deer reported. You extrapolate that times 10, that means we lost roughly 55,000 deer in 3 counties. It was so bad that there was very few areas around here that you could get out of your vehicle and not smell death. It was just unbelievable. And a lot of areas, I don't want to say they were wiped out, but they were almost wiped out. The majority of the deer that survived were yearlings or that year's fawns. And the thinking is the colostrum and the mother's milk gave them some immunity, but almost all of our adult deer were killed or died from that disease. It was just awful. But what was unique about this was it blanketed just a really big area versus spotty in pockets like we normally see it. So, for example, in the whole state of Ohio in 2023, there were 18 reported cases of EHD in the whole state. I personally found 72 last year within 5 miles of right here. Myself, I found 4 times as many deer, one guy, as the whole state found in 2023. So it was just really off the charts. And there's a lot of thinking as to why that happened, but most likely what happened, we had a very unusually wet May, June, and July. So we averaged these are rough numbers, like 4.3 inches of rain in this county in July. My rain gauge had about 14 inches of rain in July. So we had standing water everywhere because of all that rain. Then in August, the faucet shut off. We went like 3 or 4 weeks, no rain at all. So the water receded, exposed mud, and those midges, which are little like no-see-ums gnats, that spread that disease, it exposed all that mud. And so the midges were just off the charts. When I'd mow my yard in the afternoon, you'd have to wipe the midges off. They were just everywhere. And they bite us too, but obviously we don't get EHD, thank God. And it was just terrible. We had the first lab case confirmed in the lab in this county right around July 4th, which was over a month earlier than we've ever seen it in the history of Ohio. So it got an early start, and it's a kind of a deer density dependent disease where 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. So it got a really early start. So it took off, and it just literally just decimated our deer population. Now, hopefully the silver lining to that is that areas of the country that have, and even of this state, that have seen EHD outbreaks, severe EHD outbreaks, historically come back stronger than ever. And so in this area, prior to last year, we had more deer in this area than I'd ever seen. I'd been here since '82. I'd never seen, we had deer we had too many deer, to be honest with you. When I say too many, we weren't beyond the carrying capacity of the land, but we just had a lot of deer. And basically Mother Nature just said, hold my beer, I'll take care of that for you. And that's what happened.
Yeah. Let me ask, before the EHD breakout, and you were saying there's more deer than you've ever seen in this area.
Yeah.
Was there a noticeable browse line in the woods?
No.
Okay.
Maybe in metro parks and places like that, and in the city, some of the towns. But no, not out here. I never saw true browse lines like some other states that really have a lot of deer. But it was not uncommon. I mean, I live out here in the country. It was not uncommon to see 10 or 15 deer just in your ride in between here and town at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Not just in the evenings, I mean, they were literally deer bedding in yards and all over the place. We just had a lot of deer. And actually, our deer program administrator just retired, which he was our head deer biologist for the state. He's my neighbor here, and he's one of my good friends. And he had been telling me for the last 4 or 5 years, he said, Mike, we're heading for a cliff. We're heading for a cliff. And what he meant is that our deer densities are getting so high, and our Division of Wildlife is losing levers. It used to be we could add more season dates and more permits, but when you have more people interested in just trophy bucks, you can issue all the permits in the world and it doesn't really matter. And if access continues to get more and more limited, that doesn't mean if nobody can get at them, right? It doesn't matter the seasons and the permits and all that stuff. And so our Division of Wildlife is losing levers to pull to rein that back in. And he had been warning me for a while that, we were headed. I don't think in the state of Ohio, what we saw here last year, I don't think it's the last time we'll see it. I think we're going to see outbreaks in other areas of the state just like that. I mean, I can't say that for sure, but I just feel like that's going to happen.
Now, also one thing you were talking about with EHD, bad EHD breakouts in other areas of the country, you said a lot of times it comes back stronger than ever.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
So when it's stronger from a quality perspective. So here's an example. Jefferson and Harrison counties, which are on up the river from here, in 2017 had a pretty substantial, not as bad as this one, but they had a pretty strong EHD outbreak that blanketed a pretty wide area up there. And historically, those counties they're not great from a record buck perspective, but they're good, but they're not top tier. They're just kind of middle of the road. So at this last year's Buckeye Big Buck Club banquet, which most of those deer were killed in 2024, so 6 years after a really bad EHD outbreak, out of 88 counties in Ohio, Jefferson and Harrison were number 1 and number 2 in record book entries 6 years after a terrible EHD outbreak. So the thinking behind that is, so the other problem with the trophy hunting craze is we're targeting the best genetics. And in a 1 buck a year state, we're letting those 5 points and little, scraggly 6 points live to be 7, 8 years old because nobody wants to burn their buck tag on that deer. They want that 3.5, 4.5 year old 150. And so Mother Nature comes in and chlorinates the gene pool. She's indiscriminate, right? So you start from scratch and you have fewer deer on the landscape, which makes for better nutrition, less stress. When you have lots of deer on the landscape, they fight all the time and they're interacting with each other all the time. So everything about it is good, and it points back to the low deer densities. So you have low deer densities usually equals better quality. And that's, I think, what was seen in Jefferson and Harrison County is they came back stronger than ever because fewer deer on the landscape, better nutrition, less stress, and not necessarily better genetics, but they got rid of a lot of those quote unquote scrub bucks, started from scratch, right? And so now you had better record book class deer.
Yeah, that's impressive. I remember you saying that at dinner a couple nights ago,
Yeah.
And it was shocking. Because that's cool because you have that information because, you deal with that all the time.
Yeah.
So you're able to see that in real time and see the performance. So it's not, it's unfortunate like what happened with the EHD breakout, but it gives people a little bit of hope if you have the patience.
Yeah.
The one thing that'd be tough is if you're a landowner or even if you lease ground up here, if you're stuck with that property, you just know for a few years it's going to be pretty rough.
Oh, yeah.
As the population's trying to make a comeback, the age structure's trying to get some age on it and everything. But like you said, within that 4 to 6 year range, you ought to see something pretty substantial happen.
Yeah, in theory. So I think the biggest fear is, and I've seen, some other areas of the country where they've said that, every 2, 3, 4 years they have an EA, and that's obviously a real concern. Now, if we can go 6, 7, 8 years without another one, we have great hunting. But boy, if it's every 2 or 3 years, that'll be demoralizing.
Yeah,
we've actually seen a reduction in real estate values year over year in this area because of that EHD outbreak, and a lot of leases that that, guys had for years came up because they didn't want to pay to come lease, ground this year. And so this is actually a great time in this area to invest in ground because real estate prices have been depressed a little bit and there's a lot of leases available. And I've talked to several landowners that have said that the guys that quit them, they're going to tell them to pound sand, you know what I mean, if they come back. So this is actually a pretty good time if you want to hunt in an area like this.
Very, very, very interesting. So, is there anything else in that EHD conversation that's worth noting to give people where there's a little bit of hope or a little bit more understanding? Because at some point this summer, we're going to get reports from somewhere in the country with EHD breakouts. Yeah.
Well, in theory, if you have fewer deer on the landscape, so they're not exactly sure how EHD overwinters, where does it come from? And the one theory I've heard is they call it the typhoid Mary theory, which 100 and some years ago when typhoid spread all around the globe, there was this gal, Mary, who was, she was like a maid to a very wealthy guy that traveled, and she was infected with typhoid but didn't get sick, and so she spread it around. So there's some theories that some deer are infected with EHD, can be contagious, but don't get sick. And so a midge bites that deer, then it bites another deer that doesn't have that same immunity, it gets sick, and then another midge bites that, and that's how it explodes. And so there's some other theories that the midges go down and they actually survive the winter. They go down below the frost line and they're able to survive the winter. I'm not exactly sure if anybody really knows how that disease lives, year over year. But I can tell you that, like I said, we've had it here in this area for at least 30 years, but conditions last year were it was just a perfect storm. Just a lot of deer, a lot of rain, made a lot of midges, equaled a lot of death. And so in theory, we shouldn't have that problem for a while because we just don't have the deer densities that we had.
And see, what's interesting is, because we've never really had a discussion about EHD, but an interesting thing is I always thought it was something to do with drought. Just overall drought.
That used to be the thinking, yeah.
But
it's baloney. But yeah, that used to be the thinking.
Yeah, so that's not true at all. But you have to have a lot of moisture and then dry.
So the drought theory was this: that the deer would congregate at watering holes. So they would all get together because water was limited, and then the midges were there and they'd bite all the deer. And there also used to be a theory that it would pick on bucks more than does because they find more dead bucks than does. And the thought there is that, well, bucks are in bachelor groups in the summer where the does are spread out in family units across the landscape, and the bucks all go to that one watering hole where the midges are, and they all get bit and they all get sick. I've heard other theories that, when antlers are growing, their blood running through them, there's more surface area for the midge to bite. And I'm not exactly sure. Although I will say in this area last year, I did not see any discriminatory. They just killed them all. There was no bucks versus does. It just killed almost everything.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Not something we deal with very much in the South.
Well, in the South, you guys have had it longer, right? And so I read something not long ago where in Texas, an area in Texas where they were doing serum samples on deer, like 80 plus or 85% of the deer in that area tested positive for antibodies to EHD. So in most areas of the South, you have EHD in the South. It just doesn't wipe them out like it does up here. You lose about 1 out of 10. We lose like 9 out of 10. So it's just much more pronounced up here. You would not notice it down there because 10% of your deer on a bad year is still not, not that noticeable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very rare for us to see because when they survive it, there's something that happens with their hooves.
Yeah, they slough off. And they get what's called a fever line. We actually, so in this county and in this area, the Division of Wildlife did serum sample tests and they did some tissue sample tests. I actually provided about 10% of the samples for them from friends that I knew that killed deer during the hunting season. And 54% of those deer, these are the deer that survived the outbreak, tested positive for EHD. They had antibodies, meaning that they got it and lived through it. They were the 10% that lived through it. And I got trail camera photos of several deer this year that were walking and their backs were like hunched up and their hooves looked like elf shoes. Like they like curved up where the end of their hooves were sloughing off, where you could tell they had survived it. Most of the mature bucks that I saw killed in this area were EHD survivors. They had what's called a fever line. It was like a line through the hoof and the ends of their hoofs were all like cracked and broken. That's a telltale sign that a deer has had EHD and lived through it.
I've seen that. I could count on one hand how many times I've seen that in the Southeast. Like the first time, my buddy killed one a couple years ago on a local management area that I live close to, and he sent me pictures of it, and he was all skinny and emaciated looking. This was in November, and his hooves were like that. He had the elf shoes and everything. He's like, "What is wrong with this deer?" And I'm like, "I think that's EHD. That's the first time I'd ever seen it in Alabama."
So the EHD outbreaks up here in the Midwest and North, they usually end with the first frost, which is usually middle to end of October. So that would make sense in the South. You probably hadn't had a frost. That's why the deer was still emaciated. Might have still been sick at that time because you hadn't had anything to kill those midges off.
Yeah, he was afraid to eat it.
Yeah, well, humans can't catch it, but I still don't know that I'd want to eat one that looks sickly like that.
Yeah, probably wouldn't get much meat off of him, honestly.
Yeah. So I want to transition and talk in trail cameras. Like get back. We talked about this earlier, and you mentioned the phrase that if there was one thing that changed that would drastically affect the way you hunt and what you're targeting, it'd be trail cameras.
100%. Yeah.
What has the evolution of trail cameras done for you from how did you first start implementing and how did you start refining it?
Okay, so I used to be an avid trapper. I bought my wife's engagement ring at fox pelt. She doesn't like to hear that, but so I kind of likened setting trail cameras almost like a sport within a sport. So getting a picture of something you're interested in is really cool, right? It's exciting. Wow, there is. So, and then wireless trail cameras started screwing with my sleep schedule because I started getting up 2 o'clock in the morning and what's going on? And it's actually altered the way that I hunt and where I hunt, and so it's really made a huge difference because again, these areas that I hunt, I really can't glass. So it's just eyes in the woods all the time. And you learn so much about deer and their travel patterns and it's been by far the greatest tool that I've seen in the years that I've hunted.
And with trail cameras, the implementation of them, again, going from something that you had to physically check, probably starting out with film cameras. I don't know if you started that early.
Develop film.
Yeah.
Right.
So film cameras, and so transition to SD cards.
Yeah.
And now with wireless cameras or cell cameras, that's changed a lot. But how have you evolved? Or let me ask, what is your approach to trail cameras now that allows you, maybe the last 10, 15 years, it's allowed you and your sons to be extremely successful targeting specific bucks? Because we get a lot of questions of it, guys like, some of us are opportunistic, mature buck, trying to kill a mature buck, but it doesn't matter about the specific one, just a nice mature buck versus targeting a specific deer. I think a lot of guys like Andrew's got a deer. He's been drilling over for 2 years in Alabama. That is exceptional for Alabama public land buck that he gets photos of, but it's like there's a difference between getting a photo or two or some videos of a deer versus actually being able to harvest and kill that animal.
Oh, yeah.
What have you done in order to progress to be able to do that, going from photos to actually hey, I killed that deer?
Well, first thing I'll tell you, knowing that there's a deer there that you're interested in gives you the confidence to sit longer and hunt more and harder. So if you're just hoping that there's something out there, I'll start coming up with reasons why I need to get down and, I really got to go do this or my wife needs that or whatever. But if I just got a trail camera photo recently of, a deer that I'm interested in, it raises your level of enthusiasm and interest because you got a pretty good idea that there's something out there. It also allows you to evaluate deer better. Although trail cameras will fool you too. We've killed deer that we thought were better than they were, and we've killed deer that weren't as good as we thought they were, based on a trail camera photo. But, as far as strategy goes, just especially with the cell cameras, the real-time information, it just makes, absentee landowners, that's been huge for people that don't live in the area, that have eyes in the woods, and then they know how to, they normally would just, I'm going to take the first week in November off or whatever. I'm going to hunt no matter what happens, and that's it. Now they can say, well, boy, the reactivity on my property has really picked up, last week or so. Well, I need to get up there now. I need to be out there now. It's been huge for the absentee landowner, and it's also, or the absentee hunter, the guy that doesn't live in the area. But for me personally, it's really been a complete game changer again, because without it, you were just hoping, and you were just and without some real reliable person, because to a big deer to you and me might be two different things, right?
For sure.
Some people tend to exaggerate and, man, he was this wide and he was that tall, all that stuff. And so Trail cameras are very definitive. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
It does, but I want to get into the weeds of approaching camera placement. We're talking steep hill country here.
yeah. Mhm.
This isn't ag. There's no open ground really.
Yep.
So when you're looking at that, especially if you say you picked up a new permission piece, what are you doing going into a place like that of how you're starting your regiment? Of course, Ohio is a bait state, so it could be that as easy as just dumping some corn out and just seeing what's there.
Yeah.
But how do you evolve from the first time you're there, put a couple cameras out, to moving cameras around to give you the best opportunity to learn? And how much information are you trying to learn from cameras in order to put yourself in the right position to kill that deer?
Well, so getting back to the cellular camera. So the nice thing about cellular camera, you don't have to go there, right? So human intrusion is big too. I think Don Higgins talks about this a lot. A lot of people do, and I couldn't agree more. We have this, I'm going to mess this number up, but we have roughly 4 million olfactory sensors in our nose, something like that. A bloodhound that can track you 12 hours after you walked across my driveway has like 120 million olfactory. These are rough numbers. A white-tailed deer has about 240 million olfactory sensors in his nose. So I used to tell people in seminars like this, we got a bowl of vegetable soup, we smell vegetable soup. A deer smells corn, peas, carrots, their sense of smell is so keen, we can't even imagine how sensitive. And so every year, especially in ag areas or areas with fields where you can see deer, the mature bucks are out in the fields all summer long. And then all of a sudden, about 2, 3, 4 weeks before the season, they start to get real sporadic. And I was, the acorns are dropping, all this stuff. Yeah, they are. But let me tell you what else is happening. There's this strange predator that hasn't been in the woods all summer long. And all of a sudden, we're in there, we're pruning branches, we're clearing shooting lanes, we're scouting, we're squirrel hunting, we're doing whatever. And we're only there in the daylight, right? So they learn pretty quick that, hey, we've got this new predator, and you're only here in the daylight, right? And then when they get to be older, I call these deer VFWs. They're veterans of foreign wars. They've been through that before. This is exactly what happened last year, man. And these guys are going to be, and they're only here, and so I think if you can set wireless trail cameras out and just forget about them and just check them and don't have to physically go there, oh my gosh, what an asset that is. It's eyes in the woods all the time, real-time information, and you don't have to go there and mess up the area. Deer know days after we've been there that we've been there. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't necessarily scare them. And deer, I've had people tell me this, well, gee, I spooked a deer over on that ridge. I need to go hunt over here now. No. Deer, if a deer didn't go to every place he's ever been spooked, he's got no place to go. Coyotes bump them 12 times a day, right? And they don't not go back to an area because there was a coyote there. They don't go because you were there or whatever. They'll absolutely go back to it. But they also absolutely know when you're spending a lot of time there and you haven't been there all year. And so wireless trail cameras kind of alleviate a lot of that.
Well, something else, and I want to get more in depth on this conversation, but we've had people talk about, and guys talk about, like, man, have you ever had that situation where you put a camera out the first evening or afternoon, that big buck comes by and you don't see him again?
Yeah. So I have a good friend who's killed a lot of big deer, and statistically, the first time you hunt a stand is the best chance you'll ever have for killing that deer because you burn it up over time, right? So my argument to that is, though, that deer doesn't do the same thing every day. So if you were there the first time, you know what I mean, you might have missed him on the third sit. But statistically, if you're just trying to play numbers, the best time to kill a deer is the very first time that you sit in that stand. Same thing with the trail camera. Now, I will tell you this, as far as baiting and feeding goes, if you get a daytime photo of a deer at a bait site, your best chance of killing him is within 1 or 2 days of that, and then he becomes almost completely nocturnal. Almost completely. After that bait site gets established, then your chances of killing him over that bait go way down. Your best chances are within 48 hours of that first picture. And your best chances are not necessarily right over that bait site, but the spokes leading to it. If you can get away from the problem with hunting over bait, food plot, apple tree, acorn, whatever, or food source, anything that's bringing deer in, is it brings deer in, they stay. And so if you can get away from it, you can get in and out undetected. You're not spooking everything when you leave. And your chances of encountering that mature buck are greater farther away from, not way far away, but farther away from the food source, out the spokes.
All right, so let's get more into the progression of how you move trail cameras around.
Okay.
What again? You pick up a permission piece, or even if you're,
Yep.
when are you starting to put cameras out?
Well, I mean, I've got 29 cell cameras out right now, but I'm messing around with turkeys with those things too. I use them a lot for turkey scouting too, which I think I was telling you guys yesterday. People think I'm crazy. I put decoys. I shouldn't be telling this because now everybody's going to do it, but no, not everybody's doing it anyway. But I put turkey decoys up out in fields, and I put wireless trail cameras over them, and hawks beat them up, and owls and eagles and bobcats and coyotes and other turkeys knock them over. Every day I'm standing them up. But if a turkey or turkeys are inhabiting that area, they will instinctively come over and investigate that decoy. And I've had people tell me, well, you're desensitizing the turkeys to your decoys. No, I'm not. Turkeys are not smart. Turkeys are wary. They're incredibly wary. They know how to get away from things that want to eat them. They survive by eyesight. I believe turkeys see something that we don't. I don't know if it's UV rays. I don't know what it is, but it's something. There's something in our clothes, the dyes in our camos or whatever. I don't know. I can't prove this other than I've had turkeys around me and I'll blink my eye and they see me. Or how many times have you had, my favorite strategy for turkey hunting is to keep a hump in between me and the gobbler. Because if I can see him from a long way off, he can see me from a long way off. And I want him to have to be within range, pop up on that hump, and bang, it's too late. I try not to get set up where I can see him coming from 300 yards away because he can see me. And there's something about me that I think just glows to him. And so anyway, getting back to the turkeys, they're not smart, but they're incredibly wary. Now, a coyote or a deer, an old doe, a buck, they learn from their mistakes. I tell you, you call in a pair of coyotes, shoot one, that survivor has a PhD in hunter awareness. I mean, they learn. But a turkey will make the same mistake 9 days in a row if you don't kill it. Again, they're just really nervous. And so I'll have gobblers come in and beat up my decoys, and they'll come back 7 days in a row, beat up my decoys. They just don't learn. They just don't know. But anyway, it's a great way to scout. And so when I go into a new area to put cameras up for deer hunting, the first thing I'm looking at, I'm just instinctively looking at travel corridors, high traffic areas, pinch points, places that I think I'm most likely to get. Food sources are probably the easiest. And I also, so it used to be flash cameras were big in the beginning. And so you guys are friends with my good friend Eddie Salter. Mm-hmm. So 30 years ago, Eddie Salter and I were hunting up here in Ohio. We were deer hunting, and I was filming. Eddie was the hunter. And we were on a lease that I had, and the landowner, he leased the property to me, but he let a friend of his who lived out of state hunt there a couple of times a year. So I agreed as part of my lease, yeah, that guy can hunt. Well, that guy was up and we didn't know it. And he put a trail camera over a scrape about 30 yards from the stand that Eddie and I were hunting, and we didn't know it was there. And it was a flash camera, and we're up in a tree, and all of a sudden a deer walks over to that scrape, and poof, we did this flash of light. Eddie looks at me and goes, what was that? He goes, lightning. It wasn't a cloud in the sky. I said, yeah, what? Lightning? And anyway, we get down, and so anyway, the guy got a picture that day of the moon. That day, in the middle of the day, also, I mooned his trail camera. But anyway, I'll never forget. What was that? He goes, it was lightning. But anyway, yeah. So it used to be flash cameras, and so I did some field testing in my backyard with flash cameras versus infrared cameras, and there were some deer that did not like that flash. That flash would go off and like they'd been shot with a cannon. And there were other deer that paid no attention to that flash. But there were some deer that didn't like that infrared camera because it would click, it'd make a sound. There are some deer that just don't like cameras. I don't know why. So a lot of times I'll position my cameras up, looking down, so they're out of the deer's sight plane. And I tend to have better luck. If I can get that camera kind of concealed or up in elevation, I have a little bit better luck than just placing them at eye level with a deer.
That's really interesting. We grew up with flash cameras, and I remember the day I shot my deer, actually, when we went to track it, walking down the food plot, and it was in some pines, you just saw that light flash, and there's already a deer. There's another deer out there walking around. Yeah. And, it brought back some memories. I ain't thought about a flash camera in a long time. But so a lot of times, like you said, with your camera placement, it's trying to get it elevated or conceal it, but trying to get it out of line of sight. So that makes a lot of sense. but a lot of times these, if I heard you correctly, you'll place your camera typically around some kind of food source.
Yeah, or leading to it.
Or leading to it. So that could be a food plot, bait pile. We call them feed trees, but like you said, apple trees, oaks, anything.
Food plots, yeah.
Exactly. Now, what I'm very interested in asking, when you get a target buck on camera, and let's say it's before season. So I don't know, when do y'all open up here? October 1st?
No, we come in the last Saturday in September, and we go out the first Sunday in February for archery.
So say it's a week or 2 weeks before season, you finally get this target buck to show up. Maybe you just didn't know about it, or he finally just reappeared. What are you going to do, if anything, in order to move that camera back if he's not necessarily there in daylight, or is right there on the edge of it, morning or evening? What exactly is your thought process in a situation like that? Of, do you just leave the camera there and then you just kind of scout your way back? Do you move the camera back?
Or I would set another camera. You know what I'm saying? I would leave that camera there and then set another camera if I was going to make that kind of move. But I would so statistically, again, I'm the secretary treasurer of the Big Buck Club. All the score sheets come to me. The best times to kill trophy bucks in Ohio are our first week of season. That's number one. Or I shouldn't say number one. The majority of our record book bucks are killed end of October, 1st of November during the rut. But the great big deer, the Boone and Crockett class deer, a lot of those are killed, or the majority of those are killed the first week of the season, or they're killed at the end of our rut just before our gun season. And I have a theory on that. I can't prove this, but a lot of the breeding is done by the 3 and 4 year old bucks, which 3 and 4 year old deer up here will tend to be between 130 and 150 inches. So a lot of those deer make the Big Buck Club. But the Boone and Crockett class, the 170 typicals, the 195 not typical, those are usually 4, 5, 6, 7 year old deer. Older deer, I don't think they do near as much of the breeding. For one, there's fewer of them out there. They don't run out in front of cars. They don't make a lot of mistakes like the deer that are rut crazed. And I think that a lot of people hunt the end of October, 1st of November, and the masses tend to slow down by the middle of November, towards the end of November, which is toward the end of our rut. And I think those bigger deer realize that, and they feel a little more comfortable moving around. That's just a theory of mine. But by far, the first week of the season, when they're still on a summer pattern, still on a feeding pattern, a lot of those deer, and that's almost exclusively an afternoon hunt. Again, it's really difficult to tell where they're bedding. It's a whole lot easier to figure out where they're feeding. So the early season afternoon hunt, peak rut or pre-rut, peak rut, doesn't matter. Just being out there matters. And then the best time, again, then to kill a really big buck with archery equipment is the tail end of the rut, be the second half of November.
Okay. Now, is there any other emphasis on how you'll move camera? I say move cameras. Place more cameras out there when you have that buck show up.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just trying to get a better understanding. You said trail cameras are a huge emphasis for you. How is that the case, and how are you going about placing them in order to, like, are you killing, that's what I'm trying to get. Are you killing deer directly within eyesight of these cameras, or a lot of times you're moving back a little bit further away from a camera down the path you think he's walking in order to get shots?
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever really thought of it like that. I think I try. Okay, so because I'm hunting a lot of the same areas year after year after year, and you get to know how the deer use the terrain over a period of years. Now, if your question is about, I go into a new place and I don't know it, and I don't know how the deer are using it. Trail cameras help me learn that. They help me learn that a whole lot quicker than I can. I mean, it takes years of trial and error sitting there watching them to do it. But if I know the area that I'm hunting and I have a pretty good idea how the deer are using it, I try to be as non-invasive as possible. I try to be stealthy. I don't want to go in there and cut a bunch of trees down. I don't want to make a bunch of racket. As I've gotten older, my sons, who are a little more agile than I am, they help me with stands. It's funny, it's come full circle. I used to hang all their stands, and now they help me a lot. And so I don't mind climbing high up into trees, but hanging the stands is probably the most dangerous thing that we do. So my boys help me with that stuff. But a lot of my stands, I usually, and most of the places I hunt, I have multiple options. So that's the other thing about wind. I'm a real big proponent of playing wind, which in hill country is hard because, so if you're hunting flat agriculture ground and the wind's out of the west, it's out of the west. And when these hills run north and west and east and south, you get a west wind that comes over a ridge and runs north and south. It hits that wind. Now it's like a tornado. I used to tell people this: prove it to yourself. Build a campfire and tell me how many times you got to move because the smoke's in your eyes, because it's constantly swirling. It's the other thing about thermal currents too. So I try to use thermal currents to my advantage. And they're it's really interesting to try to figure it out. But in theory, warm air rises and cool air sinks, right? So these deer learn, especially the old deer, they learn to travel, with some kind of an advantage, with some type of a wind in their face, right? And so if you're hunting in hill country, at first light, let's say on a morning hunt, well, it's coolest right the end of the night, right? So that cool air is sinking down into the bottom of this valley. Then all of a sudden the sun comes up, hits that forest floor, temperature starts to rise, and that thermal current changes 180 degrees right in the middle of your hunt. What are you going to do? Get down and go to another? It's real, that's what makes it challenging. That's what makes it fun, because the deer know that too, especially the old deer. They absolutely know that. And so I was hunting a deer on the national forest. I think I was telling you guys about it a couple of years ago, and I hunted him for 7 weeks and saw him one time in 7 weeks of hunting. I saw other deer. I saw some other good deer while I was hunting, and it's big, mostly big mature hardwoods, and I could see pretty good. It was late season. I could see pretty good, and it was really interesting to see how those deer used that topography. And I've always been in hill country. I've been a big proponent of saddles in between two high points. It's the easiest path of resistance. Boy, was that brought home hunting that national forest. Those deer absolutely use those saddles. I mean, that's how they cross, and that's how they travel from one area to the other. And especially during the rut too, where the trails kind of parallel the ridges, and so the deer, when they go up and over, they're crossing more and more trails, and they're interacting with more and more does or more doe trails. Really kind of interesting. So getting back to your point about trail cameras and how to use them, of all the deer that we've killed, there's one buck that stands out as being, I want to say, our greatest trophy as a family. And my oldest son, Ryan, killed him in late January of 2009. My son was 16 years old. And this deer lived in an area, most of his home range was public ground, but we had exclusive permission on 70 acres of private ground that was off the front of this. And there was a high wall, and the high wall was 3/4 of a mile long, and it had 2 cuts in it where we could go up and down and the deer could go up and down. They were classic textbook funnels. And so I spent about 6 weeks up on top of the high wall, the big hardwoods up on top, hunting. And one afternoon in November, I was up there and hunting, targeting this deer that my son wound up killing. He was 180-inch non-typical. And there was about 140, 145 class, really nice buck that I watched. It was a warm afternoon. I watched him come down this hardwood flat, and he got right to that cut, and he bedded down. And he actually fell asleep. And it's one of the few times I've ever seen he actually rolled over on his side, and he was sleeping. And if you ever watch a dog, when he's dreaming, he'll like running like something's chasing him. He was doing that. He was running. He was having a dream, and he was out for probably at least 10 minutes. He was sound asleep, and then he'd get up and he'd look around. He'd start chewing, how they do. And he sat at that cut for probably 2 hours, and a doe came up it, and bang, he got on his gun. I thought to myself, he's doing exactly what I was doing. He went to that cut. He knew that was a pinch point, and he waited for a doe to come up that bank, and sure enough, it worked. So this was back in the early days of wireless cameras. We had these cameras called Smart Scouters, and they were about the size of a football. They were great big, and had a great big 12-volt battery in them. We had Smart Scouters at each one of those 2 cuts where the deer could go up and down that bank. And the target buck that we were trying to kill, that my son wound up killing, we had over 100 events, not necessarily pictures, but 100 events of him coming down off of that rock, off that cut, and all but 2 were under the cover of darkness. And when the season was over, I went back. There's a website called Weather Underground, and you could chart the weather, the wind direction, the historical wind direction, and that cut runs east and west, which means the wind, if it was out of the north or the south, would be at his face or at his back. So I took an Excel spreadsheet and I charted it out. And of those 100 events we had of him coming down off that rock, he came down off that rock an average of 2.5 hours later, all after dark, but 2 events, when the wind was at his back versus when it was in his face. So if the wind was in his face, if the wind had an S in it, was coming out of the south, he'd come down 2.5 hours earlier than if it had an N in it, a north, meaning it was at his back because he couldn't smell what was down there. It was really interesting. There were a couple of times, so I wound up shooting another buck. I made a mistake, and I shot a buck that looked very much like him, only smaller. It was like a 145-inch buck, very similar frame, but it wasn't that deer. In a split shot, he came by me real fast. I shot him. I thought it was him. It wasn't him. That's when I handed the baton to my son. So I was up there for a while trying to film my son take this deer, and I wound up towards the end of the season. We said it's more important for him to get an opportunity because, you know, camera guys, twice as much scent, twice as much movement, all that stuff. But anyway, there were multiple times when my son and I would come down off that rock, and before we could get to our truck, poof, there was a picture of him. He was watching us. He was absolutely watching us come down off that rock. And my son wound up killing him in a level 3 snow emergency. We had an ice storm. It was snowed and an ice on top of it. And he was actually below the rock. And that deer, the stomach got the better of him in the late season, 29th of January. He came down off that rock in the daylight to feed because the food sources were all down below. And my son wound up getting him. And it was quite an emotional hunt. But as a family, we hunted that deer for an entire season to get an opportunity out of the 29th of January. But boy, we learned a lot from him too. And those wireless trail cameras were really interesting. We would have never known any of that stuff without them.
That's one area I was going to go straight to was the wind currents in hill country. It's so hard to get them right.
Yeah.
And especially when you got real steep hills like we have up here. I mean, just yesterday, when we were turkey hunting, we were going around and we were trying to find areas that were a little bit out of the wind. And we're like, oh, we got a south wind right now. I remember Jacob being like, well, we got a south wind. And I was looking at my map when he said it. I'm like, this wind is hitting me in the face out of the north right now. And it's just because it swirls around up there.
Yeah.
And these deer like to use those wind currents, and that just, what do you have to look for in a setup to be able to take advantage of that with a buck?
Okay, so the only thing you can really do is get up on the ridges. Hunting down in the valleys of hill country is really hard because the wind swirls. It just does. There is no good wind direction. And so you really, at least my strategy is I try to hunt up as high as I can. Because if you're up on the ridge and it's a west wind, you got a west wind. The other problem you have, though, is hunting big country. So if you're hunting ag country and you've got a 15-acre woodlot surrounded by 500 acres of agriculture, you know he's coming out of there, right? But when you're hunting this big country, I got a west wind today. That's good. Well, how do you know which direction he's coming from? You don't know, right? That's what makes it. That's why they're trophies, right? If they were easy to get close to, we go to Walmart and buy one or whatever. You know, I mean, that's what makes them trophies, is because as they get older, they really learn to use these winds. So I'll tell you guys another story. My greatest trophy, as far as hardest deer to get close to, was not the 200-inch deer. Although that deer was really hard to get close to too. But I killed a deer in 2013 that my boys and I, we nicknamed the Teflon Don. We called him the Teflon Don. We thought he was unkillable. But he was at least 8.5 years old, and we based that on trail camera footage. We had 5 years of trail camera footage. And his rack, basically, the only way he could not have been 8.5 years old is if he was dropped out of the womb with a 140-inch rack. You know what I mean? He had to be at least 8. He was 8.5 years old or older. So my middle son shot him in 2011, hard quartering away from him. He tried to snake it in behind the last rib, and either he pulled the shot of the deer or something. He shot him in the butt, and he didn't hit the femoral artery, and the deer wound up surviving. And the next year, my oldest son was hunting him and had him broadside at 30 yards and shot him in the armpit, right below the heart, right here.
Oh, I know all about
that. Yeah, exactly. So the next year I get the baton. Now he's, you know what I mean? And in those years, we had 2 encounters with him, and both times the boys messed it up. So then I get the baton in 2013, and there's a place where I could hunt that you couldn't script a better pinch point than this. There's about a 5-acre field on a ridge cap. Then you got the end of the ridge cap, and it tailed off down into a valley. And at the back left corner of the valley, which would be the south end of the field, was a real steep ravine. So you had an inside corner with a ravine just beyond that. So you've got a trail restriction over here, and you got an open field over here, and about a 70-yard wide patch of woods for the deer to travel. So anything that was over here that wanted to come here and vice versa had to walk right through there, or they had to cross that ravine or had to go through an open field. Perfect pinch point. We killed over the years a lot of really good bucks. and that pinch point. Well, that was also the area that the Teflon Don inherited, or not inherited, but he inhabited. So my first encounter with him was Halloween, and the wind was out of the north. So I had two stands. We had a stand at the inside corner, and we had a stand at the head of the ravine, and again, about a 70-yard gap in between. And both in great trees, were up real high, lots of cover, really well hidden. So the first encounter I had with Halloween, I'm at the south stand, wind's out of the north, and I see him skirting the edge of the field, and he's about to pass through that cut, and he gets probably 60, 70 yards out, and he stops, and like big bucks do, he starts throwing his head up, and he's smelling, and he's trying to figure out if there's anything in front of him, but the wind's at his back, and he can't. And he starts looking around, and I'm at least 30, 35 feet in the air, in a really good tree, really well hidden, and all of a sudden he looks up and he goes, I mean, his eyes got like sauce. He spotted me in that tree, and I'll never forget, I've never seen a deer do this. He started walking backwards. He started taking steps backwards, and he got to the edge of that field, and he just very nonchalantly walked a big circle all the way around me and disappeared. And I remember I texted my boys and I said, he just beat me. Fast forward to the 16th of November, which, by the way, I'm not very good at anniversaries and birthdays, but stuff like this, I got it. You know what I mean? So the 16th of November, now the wind's out of the south. So I'm at the north stand at the inside corner, and I look off to my left, and here comes the Teflon Don. Everything's perfect. So he doesn't have a bad wind. He's got a crosswind. So the wind, he's coming from the east, the wind's out of the south, and I'm in the north. So everything's perfect. That's how you'd like it. A little bit right for him, a little bit right for me until he gets too close. And he gets like 70, 80 yards out. He stops. He throws his head up. This time he doesn't spot me, but he just doesn't like it because he doesn't want to pass through that cut. So I watch him. He goes all the way down that drainage, crosses over, and makes a big loop all the way around me. And I text my boys. I said, I think this deer's unkillable. I mean, not the way I like to hunt him. I don't think he can be killed. And about 20 minutes later, from out in the field, which was a food plot, I hear and a doe comes right under my tree with her tail up. And in behind her, I hear that. And I look, and here comes the Teflon Don. Got his head to the ground, just like a coon dog, you know what I mean? And he walks right underneath my tree, and I shoot him. Blind luck. I mean, without that doe, I don't think he ever passes through that cut unless the conditions were right. And that's how you get to be 8.5 years old. And this was interesting too. We took him to a meat processor, and he had the scar in his rump from where my middle son shot him. He had the scar in his armpit from where my oldest son shot him, and he had somebody else's broadhead in his brisket where somebody had shot him straight on. He'd been shot 4 times in his life to make it to 8.5 years old. But he was quite a character. He was a 150-inch deer, not by far not my highest scoring deer, but he was the hardest to get close to for me.
So it's funny you're talking about. It just seemed like he didn't want to pass through that cut. He didn't want to pass through that pinch point.
Yep.
We interviewed Derek Dixon from Whitetail Research on YouTube last year, and he is the guy flying drones. You've probably seen him on YouTube flying drones and just not even not hunting, just watching deer every single day.
Students of the game.
Yes. And just learning their habits, following deer around at all hours of the day, just seeing what they're doing. He said that he believes that there's some pinch points that are so good for a hunter, like it is the ultimate pinch point, that mature bucks will absolutely not use them. And he had a place on one of the farms, a really tight spot on this ridge where everything just pinched down super tight, and it's like 30 yards wide, where it pinches down and then opens back up. And he said there were certain mature bucks that would never walk through it. They would never go through that pinch point. And he's like, most hunters, you'd find that on the map or scatter, you're like, oh, this is the spot to kill them. And he's like, you could kill some 3 or 4 year olds. And
that's what we killed there. We're 3, 4, 5 year old deer, but this deer happened to be an 8-year-old deer, and that's exactly what happened there.
Well, and he said he'd seen bucks, some of these really old bucks, come down one side of the ridge, get within 100 yards of it, and then do a loop down and be willing to walk through kind of a ravine off the side of that ridge and cross that big steep drainage and come up the other side to not walk through that pinch point.
That's exactly what I saw,
That's crazy.
Yeah, well, you can't get to be 8 years old, by lucky, right? You just can't. You can't roll snake eyes every time, right? So I think David Moore says this also, and it's true. When a whitetail deer gets to be 6+ years old, there's really something unique about them. If they did what they were supposed to do, we'd kill them, right? There's something unique about them. There's something different about them. They don't do... So I used to write for Ohio Game and Fish magazine. And one year they gave me an assignment to interview people that had killed the highest scoring bucks from the year before. And I interviewed these people, and it gave me a story, gave me an idea for another story of why are these giant bucks getting killed by relatively novice hunters. And so I interviewed this one guy, killed a 240-inch non-typical. Oh, well, I just took my four-wheeler and got off the stand and just walked away. He was just right there, and I shot him. This other gal, killed this 190-inch, whatever. And, well, there was this little clump of stuff out in the field there, and it just, it was not an area that you would have thought, yeah, deer. But again, that's how deer get to be old, right? And so it made me think that a couple things are in play there. One, guys like us that think about this stuff year round, it means a lot to us. There is no way to practice for the adrenaline rush that hits you when you see something. I don't care if it's a doe, whatever it is. That's why we do this, right? I mean, this would be the worst job in the world, you know what I mean? If you didn't like doing this stuff, right? There's no way, I don't care how many times you practice with your bow. Well, let me tell you a story to preface this. Miles Keller, I don't know if you guys have heard that name, but so back in the 80s, he had killed more Pope and Youngs than anyone. And I happened to be at a sporting goods store in Columbus, Ohio, when he was doing an in-store promotion. And after it was over, a bunch of us were around asking him questions. And I said, Mr. Keller, I said, why? I said, how do you prepare for that, that moment of truth? How do you get? He said, well, once you've been around enough big deer, your nerves will start to calm down. And I remember thinking then, if that ever happens to me, I'm going to quit because this is way too much work. I mean, it's that excitement, right? And so no matter how much you practice, now granted, a good archer, a person who practices a lot, is going to be more proficient, but a good archer cannot practice for that adrenaline rush that hits you. So I use that as one point. So why do novice hunters kill some of the biggest bucks killed in the country every year? One, they don't get excited like we don't. Well, hey, there's a deer over there. The biggest 8-point buck I ever scored was killed by a guy a few years ago. No, not a few years, several years ago, but a few miles from here. It's 27-inch inside spread, typical 4x4 netted right at Boone and Crockett. And he was going gun hunting. It was during gun season. He put his Carhartts on and his orange jacket, and he walked out the back porch, and he looked across his cow pasture, and he saw deer legs. And he went, hey, there's a deer. Pow, hey, look, it's got horns on it, and they're that big. And so, how does that happen? And it happens because he didn't get nervous. He didn't get excited. So people that it means a lot to, we tend to get really excited. And big deer don't do what they're supposed to do, because if they did, they'd be dead. And so novice hunters don't necessarily go where public land. So we've got a lot of public land around here. Everybody wants to get way in the back because that's where, and everybody goes way to the back. And the deer know that. And a lot of the very best hunting is in some of the most obvious places, closest to the parking lot. But people don't, they think, oh boy, I better get away from the masses. Well, that's where the masses go. And so I used that to write another story about why do some of the very biggest deer get killed by novice hunters. One, they don't get as excited as we do. And two, they don't do what we do. They do uncharacteristic things, which are what big bucks do. You can't get to be old by being lucky.
Mm-hmm. I was hoping you would say that about novice hunters kind of going to areas that a more experienced hunter would not think about going. Yeah. Because it's too obvious or it's like too easy to get to.
Exactly.
Stuff like that. Because we've interviewed so many people and that's come up many a times. And it's not, and like stories of, guys getting invited to a hunting club. They've never been there before. The club president or whoever they're going with puts them in a spot no one's hunted for 10 years because it's not good. It's not worth it.
Plain sight.
And that is where that buck is spending some time, and that the biggest buck in the property will get killed for that year at that spot by that brand new person who's never been there before. Yeah. And I think that's a common factor. And we see this all the time, and you've probably seen it, writing articles and hear reports and scoring a bunch of big deer, being part of some of these big deer get scored is a lot of kids killing deer where their dad or uncle or someone drops them off in a spot that's easy to get to. And a lot of times they shoot the deer as the guy's leaving, whoever the mentor is, they're leaving out. They ain't even got to the stand. They shoot that buck, and that buck heard or smelled or saw something that, a person was in the area. They came out and investigated, and they shot the deer. And that happened to me as a kid. Yeah. I shot a nice buck, not a big deer, but a nice deer, especially as a kid. Yeah. It was like that. My uncle literally just dropped me off. I was climbing up the ladder, and that sucker stood up and was walking right to where he had heard the commotion of us getting off and getting out of there. Yeah. So I think that's another factor. And it's like, there's no way to practice that. I mean, because, we're not doing that. But, it happens all the time.
My youngest son, I dropped him off once. I literally drove him to a stand in a pickup truck. It was on the edge of a field. And before I got about halfway across the field. I got a phone call. I stopped, take the phone call. Before I left the field, my son got him. What? I haven't even left the field yet. You got to be kidding me. Exactly what you said. Deer saw me leaving. Figured that, yeah. So I'll tell you a quick funny story about getting nervous. So in my life as a deer hunter, I've seen 2 deer from a tree stand that I consider to be exceptional, buck of a lifetime. So I saw the one that's mounted in here, which is a spectacular deer, and I saw another one. And again, I'm not good with anniversaries, birth dates, but on October the 18th, 1998, I was in a tree stand about 3 miles from here, and I was at the head of a big bowl, and there was a meadow in the middle, there's like a triangular shape, maybe an acre meadow. And this was before rangefinders, but there were 3 scrapes at the corner of that meadow, and I had stepped them off. The middle scrape was 21 big steps from my stand, which made it about 24 yards if you go like that. And I was in a perfect tree. It was an old fence line oak tree, white oak, that went up and then it broke into 3 trunks, and I was cupped in the middle of that trunk. I was in an API Baby Grand Twister tree stand. I had lacrosse boots with my mossy oak camos tucked down into lacrosse. And I'm watching these 3 scrapes, and up the ridge behind me, this hardwood flat, I see the biggest typical buck I, to this date, have ever seen in my life. A spectacular deer. And I see him coming towards me, and he's browsing, he's feeding on acorns, and he's taking his time. And I used to like to shoot sitting down, especially if the deer's off to my left. And, you just bend at the waist, and you know what I'm saying? And so, anyway, I'm not sure why, but when I saw this deer, I just, and I tried to stand up. And I won't stand up because it'll mess up your mic, but I got 3/4 standing, and when I did, the API Baby Grand Twister tree stand seat clipped the top of my lacrosse boot and went kapink, and it was just enough that deer went. And he started scanning the horizon. And I'm 3/4 standing, shaking like a dog passing bones. I mean, this is the deer of a lifetime. And he looks around, what seemed like forever. It was maybe 30 seconds or, and he wags his tail and he keeps right on walking. And he comes down to that center scrape. And at that time, I had 1 pin on my bow out to 30 yards. He's 21 yards from the base of my, I know the distance. His head's in the licking branch doing that stuff, dead broadside to me. I draw back. I touch my release. He mule kicks, which is what you like to see, right? And he runs off, tail down. I immediately sank into my seat and thought, I just killed the biggest typical anybody's ever seen a picture of. This thing is just, he was so big, so impressive. Got down out of my stand, lowered my bow down, got down my stand, walked over to the scrape. There's my arrow in the ground, clean as a whistle. I was so shook up after that kapink and all that stuff happened and the shaking, and I'm not sure what happened. Fellas, I've replayed it a million times in my mind. I don't know if I shot under him, shot over him. All the indicators were I hit him, I center punched him. When he mule kicked and ran off with his tail down, those are all great signs. I thought my pin was right in the center of his chest, right in the middle of the boiler room. And I just fell apart. And I immediately thought, man, I must stay out there for 2 weeks. And now, wait a minute. He never saw me. He heard something, right? But he didn't. I actually wound up seeing him about two or three hunts later. I saw him one more time, but he was up on that ridge and he never did come down to those scrapes. So funny part of that story, I've got some good friends from Louisiana that come up here and hunt with me every year. One guy was a college guy, a classmate of mine here. The other guy, we worked for the same company, based out of Chicago. They live in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Baton Rouge. So anyway, these guys have been hunting with me forever, and they're great guys, but their expectations aren't what mine are, because where they live, a 130-inch buck is really a nice deer. So they'll shoot the first Pope and Young they have an opportunity to, and I don't blame them, because that's, a great buck for them. But anyway, so the next month, or actually maybe 2 weeks later, they're up hunting with me. And we go and pick I pick the one brother up. They're brothers. I go pick the one brother up, and the other brother comes down off this hillside in the same area where that giant buck was. and he's crying. I mean, bawling like a baby. I mean, just alligator tears. Like we thought somebody died, something really bad. He's crying, grown man. And his name's Vincent. And his brother said, Vincent, he said, what happened? He goes, starts sniffling. He goes, I just messed up the second biggest buck I've ever seen in my life. And his brother had killed a 150-inch deer the year before. He goes, it was smaller than one I killed last year. He goes, no, it was smaller than one I messed up 15 minutes earlier. He had that giant buck. He had a good buck come by, and he screwed up. And he had that giant buck come by him, and he drew back. And when he touched his release, his arrow went right off the deer's antlers. He was staring at the antlers. He shot the deer in the antlers. The deer was that big. I mean, it was that big that just, when you saw it, it just take your breath away. It was just phenomenal. I don't want to tell you how, because to my knowledge, it was never killed, or whoever killed it never had it scored, which was really unusual. So I think the deer either died of natural causes or it was poached or something. But it was just phenomenal big.
You probably don't want to say it, but
yeah.
You've seen a lot of big deer. How does it compare to some of the big deer you've seen in the past, like big typicals?
I honestly think that the deer would have netted. I mean, well, here's what was unique about it. I'm drawing a blank on the guy from Indiana that killed a great big typical Dustin Huff.
Yeah, Huff. The Huff buck.
I honestly think it was in that class. I mean, the big ones get away are always that big, right? But I'm just telling you, I've seen a lot of big deer in my life.
You've killed, and yeah.
It was in the same. The typical frame was similar to the deer that the 200-inch non-typical that I killed. Only the difference was, and this is the guy who cried. What he said the same thing. The tines looked like baseball bats. The tines were real heavy. So everything about the deer was big beams, but the tines were real heavy. It had, for lack of a better word, it had shock value. I mean, it took my breath away. It was, like I said, I've seen two deer in a hunting situation. While I was in a tree stand, I've seen two deer that I thought were exceptional. That was one of the two. He was, oh God, I mean, it's, how many years later, I still have nightmares about it. And this is funny. So my dad is not a hunter, as I said, but he's my best friend. And so I remember I had a Nokia flip phone, and I'm walking back to my stand. I'm inventing cuss words, every other word. Son of a guy, walking back to my tree stand, and I call my dad, and I'm like, I tell him the whole story, and he gets kind of quiet. And pardon my French, but my dad goes, "That's a," and I'm like, Dad, you don't understand. This is a life-altering event. He's like, I'm sorry to hear it. That kind of. But if you don't hunt, you don't know what a big deal that is.
It's like, oh, there'll be another one, son.
Yeah, don't worry about it, son. Get over it. It's just a deer, No, it wasn't just a deer. It was a deer of a lifetime. Yeah, I have another friend of mine who, well, those two brothers actually had two encounters with that deer that week. The one brother, they were hunting about 500 yards apart, and one brother jumped the deer, and it ran over to the other brother who was halfway up the tree, climbing in his stand, and he just got to see it go by. Then I had another friend that was hunting ground next door to it. He had a couple, not necessarily encounters, but he physically saw it a couple times, and we all agreed it was just the biggest deer we'd ever seen. It was really, really impressive.
Now, one thing you mentioned in that story is you were hunting scrapes, and that buck came in and worked that licking branch right there in front of the shot.
Yeah.
What is your history of hunting scrapes?
So historically, they're hitting primarily at night. I mean, we've killed deer. I've killed deer over scrapes before, but what trail cameras taught me. Here's the other thing about trail cameras too is, so you don't put a trail camera over a scrape until it becomes an active scrape, unless you make a mock scrape and get them to start hitting it. And I have learned that that'll shut that scrape down quicker than anything. Putting a scrape, just getting close to it and setting up a trail camera close to it will make that scrape go inactive. A scrape that's getting hit all the time, you put a trail camera over, all of a sudden it dries up. And I think it's that human intrusion. I think it's that, us putting all that scent around that the deer just stop using it.
Now, what is your history when it comes to hunting scrapes, and how long you've been doing it, and how did that play? Well,
okay, so the father, I can't say this matter of factly, but I believe the father of scrape hunting is from Ohio. His name's Roger Rother. He passed away several years ago, but he's from Northwest Ohio. I know he's the father of not necessarily trail cam technology, but back in the 60s, they used to make alarm clocks, or clocks that when you pull the plunger out, it would stop the clock. So he would take like a thread and put it over a deer trail with a clock over here. And a deer would walk through and hit that thread and it'd pull the plunger. So he didn't know if it was 6 o'clock at night or 6 o'clock in the morning, but he knew at 6 o'clock something walked through there and tripped that. Roger Rother wrote a couple of books. One was called Whitetail Magic, and I forget what the other was called, back in the 80s. They're, to this date, probably the best literary works ever written about the sport of deer hunting, or or bow hunting for trophy deer. He was a student of him. He invented a broadhead called the snuffer broadhead, the Rothair snuffer. He was a machinist at the Timken Roller Bearing Company in Northwest Ohio. And he really, a lot of the things that we take for granted today, like scrape hunting, he was the guy that figured that out, that, hey, these are deer communication. He watched deer make scrapes, and then he realized that they would come back and revisit them. So I can't say matter of factly, but I believe he was the father of scrape hunting back in the late 70s, early 80s. But we've killed deer over scrapes, but I think I was telling you earlier today, back when I hunted scrapes a lot, I used to move scrapes. I would take a clean 5-gallon pail, go into an area that I wasn't hunting, find a fresh scrape, dig up the top couple inches of dirt, put it in that pail, take a kitchen trash bag and put it over top of the licking branch. Very careful, rubber gloves not to touch anything. Take snips, cut the branch off, then go into an area that I'm hunting, find a good place for a scrape, the ground's flat and the right kind of tree with the right branches at the right height, and then take that licking branch, take zip ties, tie it onto that branch, then make a scrape with your rubber boot or a stick or whatever, take that dirt from that other scrape that you moved, mix it in, and now you've moved a scrape from 5 miles away, and the deer, it's got other deer's urine in it and all those glands and all that stuff, and I used to do that a lot, and those deer would take it over immediately. But I don't hunt scrapes too much anymore, again, because the trail cameras just changed the game as far as scouting goes.
The one thing though about moving scrapes, I'm just real curious about, what time of the year would you typically move a scrape?
So in this part of the country, scrapes start popping up late September. The earlier, the better. And then deer, historically, they'll hit scrapes like after a storm rolls through and the leaves blow off, and when the leaves are dropping, cover them. And then that pre-rut right before the rut starts to peak. Then when the rut kicks in, scrapes, really the usage really trails off pretty quickly. Then it becomes just a question of being out there. But yeah, probably up here, I would start doing that late September into, through October. But it all varies by the area. And down your way, your rut doesn't kick in until Christmas, right, or later, so it'll be different.
Okay, interesting. Let me just ask you, because I'm always interested when someone has experience hunting scrapes. Even though you said, again, based off trail cameras, you kind of stopped doing it.
Yeah.
Was there anything that you learned about specific scrapes and that got more use than others, and maybe if there was any commonality between elevation, location, just stuff like that?
Well, there are certain areas that deer scrape in every year, and there's something about that topography and those trees. So in this part of the country, deer like to scrape underneath sapling beech trees, and the beech trees hold their leaves longer, and I don't know if it holds scent longer or what. Just like we don't have a lot of cedars now in Southwest Ohio and Kentucky, a lot of cedar trees, but this part of the country, not a lot of cedars. But we have a lone cedar tree in the woods. Every buck comes by, it will rub that cedar tree. They just do. You'll see cedar trees, rub this big. Wow, that could be a spike that did that. That's the other thing about rubs. I've seen big bucks destroy little trees. I've rarely seen small bucks hit a bigger tree. Usually if you find a tree that's rubbed on a bigger tree, it tends to be an older deer, not necessarily a big rack deer, but an older deer. I rarely see spikes and yearling deer hit big trees, but I have seen big bucks tear up small trees. It's more of a violence thing, you know what I'm saying? The 3 and 4 year old deer seem to do a lot of that in this area. They're the ones that lay down most of the sign.
Very interesting. Is there when it comes to buck sign, is there anything that you put more value in than other types of buck sign?
Well, sightings obviously are number one, but if you see an area that is obviously tore up with sign, that usually means or signals that you have bucks of a similar age class competing for dominance. You go into an area and there's a bunch of rubs there, that's bucks that are trying to make a statement. They're trying to tell it, hey, I'm here. And so that's usually really encouraging. Obviously, if you see a lot of scrapes, a lot of rubs, that usually says there's overlapping territories there. And there's bucks that are trying to make a statement to each other that, I'm the man.
I was going to ask about tracks because as we've been turkey hunting up here, I've just noticed that there's a lot of good track dirt up here. Even in the woods, I was finding tracks.
Yeah. Clay, correct.
Oh, yeah. Do you ever find, or do you ever look for just like a real big track when you're trying to figure out a buck?
That's obviously a good sign, a big track. But I don't know that I put, again, I hate to say this, but I'm kind of hung up on, because I'm really interested in buckeye big bucks. I don't pay that close of attention. I mean, I've killed some big deer that had little feet, And I've seen some not so big deer have big feet. So I don't know that I've really paid. I have seen some unusually large. Now, tell you a funny story about tracks. So I've got a college buddy of mine that I used to hunt with a lot, but I still hunt with some. And we went turkey hunting up in northern Michigan, just this side of the Mackinac Bridge, just before you cross into the UP. And they have elk up there. And the year I took him turkey hunting up there, I didn't not tell him I just didn't think to tell him there were elk there. First day we got there, we're walking down this 2-track. He looks down, he says, "Oh my gosh, look at the size of these deer tracks." And I'm like, wait a minute, he doesn't know that. And then we went a little farther and we found rubs on like telephone poles. He's like, "We got to come deer hunting up here, man. It's unbelievable." And then I told him, "Oh, no. There's elk up here, man." And he thought, "My gosh, they got giant deer up here," which they do, but yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. With the trail camera, so one thing that we've heard a lot from guys who hunt in hill country, mountainous terrain, is when you're going through these pinch points and you're looking around in the woods, you'll find deer trails that are kind of carved into the side of the hill or whatever.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you'll find like these big, just ancient deer trails. Like it's probably been there forever. It's wallowed out.
Yep.
And I'm curious if you've seen with your trail cameras, if the upper echelon, older age class deer, are they using those big trails or do they have their own little trails?
I believe they use the secondary trails. Again, and that probably ties in with that solitary type trait. I think you rarely see really older deer on well-worn, beaten trail. I think the masses of deer use those, and I think those bigger bucks use those secondary trails. That's been my observation. So, and again, that all came to light when I was clued in on the fact that big bucks are such solitary creatures.
Right. So when you're placing your trail cameras out in the woods on everything that we've talked about, how do you know that you're like really on top of that deer? Like, do you need a picture of that deer twice a week, 3 times a week, 4 times a week?
Well, so getting a picture, for one, it boosts your confidence that he's still above ground, right? He's still alive. Because if you go a long time without getting a picture of a deer that you're hunting, you start to, is he moved off? Now, I can tell you this, I have seen this many times. The demographics of a deer neighborhood change from year to year. So a 2-year-old becomes a 3-year-old, a 3-year-old becomes a 4-year-old, and vice versa. And so what happens is we've had deer in areas that we hunt disappear for years, and we swore they were dead because they were regulars. See them all the time, and then they're gone, and you're like, he's dead. And then he shows back up the next year. Sometimes 2 years later, shows back up. Man, that's him. You got some feature about him where it's him, right? What happens is that 3-year-old becomes a 4-year-old. So it's like this. If you're in the dating market and you're going to nightclubs or bars where you're trying to meet women, and you got this one bar that, man, it's got a lot of girls in it, but you got to fight every time you go there. Well, you're going to go to the bar down the road. Maybe doesn't have as many girls in it, but you got to fight every time you go there, right? So a lot of bucks get displaced by bully bucks. So that's something else in a 1 buck a year state. I have absolutely seen this. We have had, over the years that I have been able to keep track of deer in this area, we have had a handful of deer that we know have made it to 10 plus years of age or older, which is ancient in deer. And the reason they made it to 10 is they wouldn't have made 130 on their best year, but they're aggressive, they're bullies, you know what I'm saying? And in a 1 buck a year state, you can't take them out unless you want to. And a lot of times you can't trust someone else. Hey, I got this scrubby 8-point in there. Go kill him, and you send him in there, and he kills this 3.5-year-old 8-point that you didn't want shot. Because he just doesn't know. That kind of stuff. So it's tricky by doing that, and so bucks will displace. So here's an example. Back in the late 90s, 98, 99, I let the Ohio Department of Natural Resources Division of Wildlife radio collar does on that 800-acre block I was telling you about. And they were doing a fawn mortality study. It's really pretty interesting. They put a transmitter up in the birth canal of pregnant does, and when the does would give birth, that transmitter would drop out, and when it would change temperature 5 degrees, it would start to emit a signal. Well, the first day of a fawn's life, it doesn't move anywhere. So as soon as that thing started to emit a signal, the biologist could walk right to it, and the fawn would be right there. And they were putting lifetime collars on these deer that would expand and grow with them. They were able to radio collar like 36 fawns on my property over a 2-year period. One of those male offspring fawns that they radio collared was killed by a friend of mine 10 miles from my house. 10 miles as the crow flies from my house, where he got displaced by his mother, because we weren't shooting enough does back there, and he just kept right on rolling. And 4.5 years later, or 4 years later, he was killed 10 miles away. Really, this was kind of a funny story about this. So the very first night these guys came out, again, this is 1998, so the technology isn't what it is today, right? So they had this big thing, looked like a VHS antenna, and the guy had headphones on. And so we set up in my backyard, and this was in February, it was after season. And what they were doing is they were darting these deer with tranquilizer darts, and the anesthesia that they would give them was only good for like an hour, and then the deer would wake up. So they would dart them, and then they would go out, catch them, and that's when they would put the, and they would also put an ear tag in the doe so they'd know which doe had been darted. Well, the very first night they showed up, I said, guys, can I go with you? And they said, sure. So I got set up with them, and this doe came in, and bing, they shot it and took off over the bank, and the guy put the headset on and stuff. And they got this tackle box full of stuff with the collars and all the other stuff that they were going to, the tags and all that. And so I'm carrying a tackle box, and we get down in this valley, and the guy goes, man, I am getting 100% signal right here. This deer has got to be close. And we're looking around, and we don't see it. And now it's starting to get dark. And he goes, well, maybe the signal's bouncing off this hill. So we go down and cross the valley. We get up on the other side. And he goes, I'm still getting 100% signal right here, and there's no deer. And I'm like, well, how many of them transmitters you got? And he goes, well, that tackle box I was carrying had another transmitter in it. They were tracking me. I was with them. So anyway, that deer got away. We never did wind up finding that deer. It was funny. I called the next day. Because the anesthesia they were using was actually toxic to humans for like 24 hours. So had that deer been hit by a car or something happened and somebody would eat it within 24 hours, it could make them sick. So the next morning I called the Division of Wildlife Office, and I disguised my voice, and I said, yeah, I was hunting out there on the Scatter Ridge, and I just saw a deer. It's got a harpoon in its butt. I said, is it okay to eat him? And, sir, where are we at now? But anyway, yeah, it was funny. But they darted 36 of them on my property. This was interesting also. They lost a third of those deer to coyote predation. That's right when the coyote population really started to explode in this area. And I honestly think that was a little high, and here's why. So the first few days of a fawn's life, one of their primary defense mechanisms is they're pretty much scent free. Their mother kills them. They don't smell like anything. So by those guys handling those fawns and putting those collars on them, they were putting human scent on the fawn. And so their argument was, well, human scent should repel coyotes. And I'm like, yeah, but anything that makes a coyote look over there is a bad idea. Anything that draws a coyote's attention, and there's a fawn there. So that number may have been skewed, but they did lose a third of those fawn that never made it to the huntable population because of coyote predation.
I've always wondered that because a lot of other fawn studies, and they have super high mortality rate when they have some kind of collars on it. I'm like, I know a lot of them do get eaten and get killed.
Oh, yeah, no question.
But it's like, because of you handling it, you being in the area. Same thing with turkey nests. Walk up to a turkey nest, you flush your hand and you walk up to it. Does a raccoon come in there, find your scent, or a possum or whatever, and kind of follow it into that same spot? Because it's just a curiosity thing? I'm not sure, but you never really know because there's no way to know what other fawns are out there without putting a collar on them and where they're at and what they're doing. So, it's an unfortunate situation, but I've always wondered the same thing.
I can forward to you guys a slide if you want to use it on this podcast of a slide that was given to the Wildlife Council in a presentation back in October about hen mortality here in Ohio. We've radio collared like 300 and some odd hens, and what our biologists are looking at is when's the mean date when they're starting to set on those nests, and so we can kind of gauge the season. Is it too early? Is it too late? And there's some other states around us cooperating. We're doing the same thing. And the mortality of what's killing these hens. So they're in, Ohio's broken into 5 districts, 1 through 5. You're in District 4, which is Southeast Ohio. Southwest Ohio is District 5. Northeast Ohio is District 3, and that's where they've radio collared these hens. So I'll send you the chart that you can look at it. But if you look at District 5, which is Southwest Ohio, there's a little section of it, maybe 10% of it, which is avian predators. That's hawks, owls, eagles, things like that. They're in them. And then a big section of coyote, which is canine, and then maybe a little section of hunting pressure or something like that, or human predation. Then in District 3, same thing. Avian predators down here, coyotes, and then District 4, where you are here, where all our bobcats are, the biggest swath by far is felines. Bobcats are just drilling our hands big time. Probably, you can look at the slide, but probably 60-70% of the hen mortality, and it's bobcats. They're really hard. Coyotes hunt like a dog. Obviously, they run things down, catch it, eat it, kill it. Where a bobcat hears a hen yelp, a gobbler gobble, he sits and waits. They're real patient. They get behind stumps and logs and things like that, and they're tough on them. And plus, they climb trees too. They can work on them at night. They're just tough on them.
Absolutely. One other thing I was going to bring up, and we talked about this earlier. I wanted to rehash it. I was mentioning to you kind of in a little break that we had, talking about going back to the whole crossbow situation, that there's some people out there that we know through social media who are anti-crossbows because when you look at some of the detailed hunter success, hunter harvest deer during archery season in Ohio, there's a large portion of them. I think at the time, some of the information he said it was just over 50%. That those deer were killed with crossbows, not with vertical bows.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how big of an issue that is, getting people out there and expanding hunting opportunities, expanding range, people that weren't previously bow hunting, getting into archery hunting through crossbows. And just was not, a couple of these guys are just not a fan of it. And you had an interesting rebuttal to that. I'd love to kind of maybe have you elaborate on that.
So part of it is this. So a lot of the folks, and I'm not saying this is everyone, but some of the people that I know that are anti-crossbow feel that if we reined in the crossbows, we would have a better age structure. We'd have more big bucks, which would in turn make big bucks more huntable for them. So they want to make someone else's life harder to make their life easier. They make someone else's hunting harder to make their hunting easier. If we had more big bucks, they'd be easier to kill, right? Because there's more of them. So if we had less crossbow hunting, in theory anyway, that's the thinking. So it's one person wanting to impose their desire on someone else. My biggest fear, states are going the opposite direction. Illinois just allowed crossbows. I mean, a lot of southern states are just allowing crossbows. There's a contingency of people here in Ohio that want us to go back into town. There's some people that want to chunk spears at them. You know what I mean? They just want to make it really, really hard. I am not in that camp. And the reason I'm not in that camp is one, you cannot convince me that if we, let me back up for a second here. There is a contingent of people here in Ohio that think that we could, and don't get me wrong, we could do things to get better. We can always get better. I'm not saying we're perfect, but I'm saying that we're pretty good. And they like to use, there's a couple people on social media like to use the Iowa model. They say, man, if we had a lottery on non-residents and we were stopping these non-residents from coming here in masses, and if we got rid of crossbows and we got rid of baiting and done all this stuff, we could be just like Iowa. Well, not true. And the reason it's not true is one, Iowa's a rural state. It's mostly rural. Ohio's not a rural state. We're an urban state. We got a lot of big cities here. We got more people in Columbus area than got in their whole state. Then they'll say, well, yeah, but Iowa doesn't have all the woods that you have. They still don't have the people spread out all over like we do. So it's an apples and oranges comparison. Iowa has never allowed baiting. Okay, never. Ohio has always allowed baiting. So if you took baiting away from us, we got an entire generation of hunters right now that would struggle to kill deer. And these folks say, well, yeah, but then they would become less, and the guys from out of state wouldn't be able to do this and da-da-da. And I still think that we would become more like Michigan. My biggest argument about Iowa is if you're a landowner, you can kill $3. You know, Iowa could learn from us. There are people, I have friends in Iowa that are like, man, why can't we be like Ohio? Why can't we just kill $1? And you got people on, why can't we be like Iowa? So I'm not saying that maybe sometime out in the future, some kind of I don't want to say a lottery, but maybe a reduction in non-resident hunters might be something I want to look at. But here's the argument on the other side of that. For one, non-resident hunters in Ohio, and these are ballpark statistics, make up about 10% of our hunting population, but they pay 57% of the bill, meaning that our Division of Wildlife and our money for conservation, 57% or 50+% of conservation money is paid by non-resident licenses and tags, but they only make up 10% of the population. So if we were to limit that, we would definitely have to raise those rates to offset, if we want to keep the same level of conservation that we have now from a monetary perspective, we would have to raise those rates. And I know a lot of people like that idea. But you know what? If you own a restaurant in a small town and these non-residents feed, come to eat, you don't want to see them go away. If you own Airbnbs and cabins and, I have people tell me, well, non-residents are leasing up all of our ground and they're displacing local hunters. That's true. But it's not just non-residents leasing our grounds. It's people from our metropolitan areas coming. It's local people leasing up our ground that are displacing. So our farmers and landowners are not, if non-residents went away and all these leases came up, our farmers aren't going to say, well, you know what? I don't want that money anymore. Come on, everybody can come on. Baloney. They're just going to get leased up by other people in state. So the same number of people are still going to get displaced by deeper pockets, right? And I don't know how you combat that, but limiting not. So then they say, well, if we did away with the baiting, they wouldn't come here. So I use this example. A couple of years ago, I was talking to some guys. My son's owned some Airbnbs in this area. And my son has one up the road here. And there were some guys from New Jersey that were here during our muzzleloader season, which is late. It's after the first of the year, which is late for us. Mm-hmm. And they were packing up. They had killed deer here. And they were going to, they were going to Illinois. They had a lease there. And I said, you guys are leaving a state that allows baiting in January to go to another state that doesn't allow baiting? Oh, yeah, the farmer where we hunt there, week before we get there, he brush hogs a bunch of corn out in the field for us, and we see more deer out there than we do here where we bait. So guys get around that stuff anyway. And even in states like in Michigan and Pennsylvania where they don't allow bait, people bait anyway. And I use this example a lot, too, getting back to bait. So there have been 2 states that I'm aware of, for sure in the Midwest, that have once allowed baiting that have taken it away. Michigan's actually done it twice. Michigan's one of those states. The other is Wisconsin. So Wisconsin outlawed baiting about 20 years ago with the idea of suppressing the spread of CWD. They didn't outlaw baiting for quality and big bucks and all that. They did it because the idea was we're going to slow the spread of disease. Did it work? No. CWD is rampant in Illinois. They've never allowed baiting. CWD is rampant in Iowa. They've never allowed baiting. CWD is rampant all over the West. They've never allowed, the states have never. So to say that banning baiting is going to slow or stop disease, hasn't anywhere else. Michigan outlawed baiting first because of a bovine tuberculosis outbreak like 20 some years ago. Then they brought it back because they realized their real problem was they couldn't kill enough deer. Then they outlawed it again, I believe, in 2018 because of CWD, and now it's in their legislature. Their House has already passed it. Their Senate's talking about it to bring it back again. Why? Because they can't kill enough deer. They've got too many deer. And so I kind of struggle with that. But getting back to your question in crossbows, a lot of people don't like them. I get that. A lot of people think it's too easy. I get that. They think that hunting was never, about that and quality. But my argument really to those people is hunting in practical terms is not about big bucks and trophy. Hunting is about hunting. The reason the masses who don't care one way or the other about hunting tolerate hunting is we're a tool to keep deer in check. Or not hunting, keep it from deer hunting. We're a tool to keep deer in check. And I don't believe that making that harder helps anything. I mean, I know some people believe that it do. They think that Iowa doesn't have, they use this example. We have a problem with attrition here in Ohio. We've lost almost a quarter of our deer hunters in the last 15 years in this state for a lot of reasons. We've lost them because access is harder. We've lost them. So the average age of a hunter in the mid 80s in Ohio was like 26 years old. The average age of a hunter today is like 54. So grandpa has now taken this, you know what I'm saying? And so there's a lot of reasons for that. The erosion of the American family, single parents, don't have time to take their sons and daughters. Even families that are cohesive, both parents work. So now it's up to grandpa to take kids hunting. And they say, well, Iowa doesn't have this problem. Again, Iowa is a rural state. Farm kids, you know what I'm saying? It's a rural culture. Ohio is not, so you can't compare the two. We're more of an urban culture. So you make hunting harder in Ohio? I disagree with the folks that say that, oh yeah, more people, we'll gain hunters if we make it harder. I don't believe that. I mean, I think that, I don't have all the answers, but I don't think that's the right answer.
That's a That's a great discussion, and I think you did a good job explaining that. It's nice to have somebody like with a state like this that I think a lot of people look at Ohio as a trophy state from a quality standpoint.
Yep.
To be able to have that kind of perspective on it, because I hear that conversation about like anti-crossbows, and the more you think about it, it kind of comes back to the ideas like maybe it's a little selfish, like let everybody kind of do what they want. We're out there to hunt, enjoy. Yeah, people want harvest big deer, but also goes back to states kind of like Alabama. There's people in Alabama trying to push for making us a $1 state. And right now, you can kill 2 does on private land. You kill 2 does a day from October 15th to February 10th. And there's not many people. I don't know anybody that does that, but they want a lot of deer taken because of the amount of the deer population and the thickness of cover. You don't have the visual all the time. You're not hunting big agriculture. There's areas like that in the state, but there's a lot of it's not. To try to manage that herd. And there's guys that are like, man, we need to go to $1 because, we'll have more bucks there. You have to be more selective because a lot of people shoot, 1 or 2 of their bucks as a meat deer, and then they try to hold out for a bigger deer. And I think it kind of comes back to what you said earlier is people want to make one person's hunt harder to make their hunt easier,
That's
which their hunt's
what it is.
Easier is I want more bigger bucks, so it's easier for me to kill a bigger buck.
Exactly. And I've heard people, so here's something about baiting that is real. That is bad. I mean, and don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that congregating deer nose to nose is a good thing. I'm not telling you. I'm not sure. Because common sense tells you that it could accelerate the spread of disease. It makes sense to me that it could. I'm not saying it's good, but I'm just saying that they use like aflatoxins. They talk about turkeys and deer too, but they say that aflatoxins on corn, on grain, can make turkeys sick. And it can. And I guess some of the newest data, the newest studies are showing that that's true if you're feeding in warm weather months like May, June, July, when it's damp and warm. But if waste grain were toxic to turkeys, there'd be no turkeys in the Midwest because there's corn laying all over these fields all winter long. So it's not, they use those as excuses, but again, their real motivation is more big deer for me. Most of the people that complain to me about that control large chunks of land. They either own it or lease it or whatever, and they're mad because they have neighbors around them that have small chunks of land that are baiting the deer off or shooting with crossbows or whatever, and they're mad about it. And I get that, and I've been victimized by that myself. But on the flip side, you take a lot of those tools away from the average hunter, he's going to quit. And then we'll have more people watching football and playing golf or doing whatever, and fewer hunters. And that's not good for the future. If you truly care about the future of hunting, you want to recruit people into this sport. You want to bring more. Most people hate to see more hunters coming. Not most people. A lot of hunters hate it when they hear about other hunters. No. If you're truly concerned about the future of this sport, we want to recruit people into it, because here's the other reason for that. As we lose numbers, our hunting numbers, and we age out, we lose our swag, we lose our shtick with the legislature. And what do those folks understand? They understand votes, right? So we're already outvoted by a lot of people that really don't like hunting, and we can't afford to lose more. The more people we lose, the more swag we lose with the legislature, the worse the future of this sport is going to get for our kids and our grandkids, for sure.
Oh, perfect. Well, Mike, I think that's a great point to wrap up the podcast. It's been a very long.
It's been a good one.
I've been keeping eyes on it, but
no problem.
Greatly appreciate your time,
fellas. You guys come back anytime.
Hey, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome. We were already talking about maybe at some point trying to deer hunt.
Hey now,
Ohio.
Don't threaten me with a good time.
Give me a couple of years, you can come on back up and hunt here.
I'll say this, and we'll wrap up. Andrew, for a couple of years, and he actually said it on the way up here, and Kyle was my witness. He said, he's like, I don't really care to hunt Ohio. He's like, man, all I hear about is non-residents everywhere, because we're talking about hunting public land. I mean, non-residents everywhere. Everybody's complaining about how bad it is, but there's big deer. But man, I'd rather go somewhere else. Then after having all these conversations, he looked at me yesterday. He's like, man, we should hunt Ohio.
Yeah, y'all converted me.
Well, here's a stat we talked about earlier. So in the last 10 years in Boone and Crockett, entries in the World Record Book, Ohio's number 2 of all states and provinces. And we're number 1 behind Wisconsin. And Wisconsin is number 1 all time, not just in the last 10 years. And people tell, well, yeah, but I know so-and-so, he got 22 Boone and Crockett. He just don't enter them. Whenever someone tells me that, I always say, no, you know a guy with 22 big deer. The difference between a Boone and Crockett and a big deer is a tape, official scores tape. I've scored 1,000,000 big deer in my life that were big deer, but they don't score Boone and Crockett. And so anyway, when you look at the record books, Ohio's number 2. That's ahead of Iowa. That's ahead of Illinois. That's ahead of Kansas. I mean, all these great destination states.
I had no idea that was the case.
Yeah,
by the
but
way.
yet we allow crossbows and we allow baiting and we got all doing all this. But we're a 1-buck state. We have good genetics, good habitat, and it's our herd is managed pretty good. Now, does everybody that kill a Boone and Crockett enter it? No, but that's always been the case. 30 years ago, everybody that killed a Boone and Crockett didn't enter it either. You know what I mean? So that's never changed. So when you look at the data, the actual numbers, Ohio's pretty steady, pretty sporty as far as mature bucks go. I mean, we're not I'm not going to say we're the best, but we're certainly among the top states in North America, and really easy access, easy to come here. So
Absolutely.
in comparison.
Well, Mike, greatly appreciate your time.
No problem, fellas. Anytime.
And for all the audience members out there, thank y'all for watching. Thank y'all for listening. We'll catch you back in the next episode from the Southern Outdoorsman. And remember, guys, y'all stay Southern.